Chapter 1449. Under the heaven-shrouding umbrella, Yangqing suddenly stood up. The white tiger great sage, who had been crouching beside her, also stood up. His eyes shone as he looked at Lin Daohan, who was in the void. Their gazes fell on the mysterious rune above Lin Daohan's head. The rune looked extremely clear, and it gave off a feeling that it had no secrets. It was as if anyone could understand it, recognize it, observe it, and understand it. But what was contradictory was that it also contained a dark and obscure concept. It was invisible, unknown, indescribable, and indescribable. It was confusing and difficult to understand. The two mysterious concepts opposed each other and gradually merged. They seemed to be clearly separated and seriously opposed, but they seemed to transform and merge with each other. The two concepts, bright and dark, merged together to form this rune. It looked clear and simple, but it also seemed inexplicable and difficult to understand. Looking closely, the rune was clearly a word. It was the word E. From this word, there was no sadness, no joy, no emotion, but it wanted to understand everything and distinguish everything. It was clearly Zhu Yi's Yi Dao talisman. But this word rune had disappeared from above Zhu Yi's head. Instead, it had appeared above Lin Daohan's head. Zhu Yi's great Tao mystique of the thousand worlds had caused a shocking change in the world. The currents that led to the various worlds actually gradually weakened at this moment. Especially when they reached Lin Daohan's body, they disappeared without a trace. Lin Feng's Brontosaurus clone looked up at Lin Daohan. Light flashed in his eyes, and he nodded slightly. Interesting. Yangqing frowned and turned to look at Lin Feng. Master, can his creation divine light forcefully steal other people's mystiques? After learning from the same sect for many years, Yangqing could tell at a glance that the current Zhu Yi did not stop the scripture of change's great Tao mystique on his own, nor was he suppressed by someone else. It was as if he had lost the scripture of change's great Tao mystique, and was unable to continue using it. The return to void Dharma body was the embodiment of one's understanding of the great Tao of heaven and earth. At this moment, the book of changes in Zhu Yi's return to void Dharma body had disappeared. Lin Daohan's performance at the moment was not to seize the spiritual qi and Dharma power, nor to break and dissolve Zhu Yi's Tao imparting the universe, but to take drastic measures, as if he was taking Zhu Yi's Tao of changes as his own. However, it was different from spiritual energy and magic power. No matter how intangible it was still an existence that could be measured. When a person cultivates his own divine ability, it starts from his own understanding of the Tao art he cultivates. It starts from his own exploration of the great Tao of heaven and earth, and after years of cultivation and polishing. How could such an existence be seized by others? Zhu Yi and Lin Daohan's current appearance was clearly not a copy, but Lin Daohan had forcibly seized Zhu Yi's scripture of change's great Tao mystique. At this moment, Lin Daohan had it, but Zhu Yi did not. Yangqing looked carefully, and saw that Zhu Yi was frowning slightly, and a solemn expression appeared on his face. However, the talisman of changes above his head did not appear again. This made Yangqing feel even more ridiculous. Unlike other divine abilities, the scripture of changes was a great Tao mystique that Zhu Yi had comprehended himself. Even if it was seized by Lin Daohan, Zhu Yi should be able to recreate it. However, at this moment, the divine ability was like a tangible object. The original object was lost, and it was difficult to retrieve. Don't panic, don't panic. Lin Feng, who was at the side, observed for a moment and smiled. The effect of his divine light of creation is temporary. He needs to constantly activate the divine light of creation to maintain it. When he retracts his own divine light of creation, everything will return to normal. Because of this, he can only seize one divine ability at a time. Activating the divine light of creation consumes a lot of energy, and it is hard to sustain. Lin Feng said with a smile, "The divine light is mysterious and profound, allowing him to temporarily seize the divine abilities and techniques that belong to others, but he is also unable to comprehend the principles of these divine abilities. He can only use them temporarily." Lin Feng looked Lin Daohan up and down and smiled. Even the depth of the scripture of changes is exactly the same as when Xiaoyi activated it. In fact, it is still Xiaoyi's divine ability, but it has been strangely distorted into something tangible. and the right to use it has fallen into this person's hands. White Tiger Great Sage also stared at Lin Daohan and snorted. You have a handsome face, and yet you produce a divine light of creation. Yet you are so evil. Lin Feng laughed. The effect of the divine light of creation has nothing to do with a person's character. There are thousands of great Daos in the world, and they are mysterious and profound. Yang Qing's brows did not relax. She said softly, he has good eyesight. Having been in the same sect with Zhu Yi for many years, Yang Qing naturally knew that when Zhu Yi refined his spirit to return to the void, he improved his divine ability. The most crucial point was actually to understand the obscure light, study the known and unknown Tao of Yin and Yang, and then create the great Tao mystique of changes. Especially the first and most fundamental manifestation of this great Tao, the talisman of changes. It seemed ordinary, but it was the foundation of other subsequent great Taos, such as Absolute Tao in 10 directions, imparting Tao to the boundless universe, and other divine abilities. They all originated from this. With the talisman of changes, Zhu Yi could see through unnamed and defeat his enemies first. At the same time, it was also one of the most important reasons for his great improvement in actual combat. After that, he cultivated other orthodoxies Dharma and Logos, and he got twice the result with half the effort. He could even achieve success in one go, and it was all thanks to the talisman of changes. Lin Daohan's divine light of creation and Yuluo divine light could only target one target at a time. However, he did not choose imparting Tao to the boundless universe or other direct divine abilities. Instead, he targeted the talisman of changes. His eyesight could not be said to not be sharp. Having the Yuluo divine light was a skill, but how to use it to its fullest potential was another skill. Yang Qing turned to look at Lin Feng. Master, no matter who the opponent is or what divine ability, can he seize it? Lin Feng shook his head and laughed. There is a limit. Otherwise, the first person he would target would be me, not your second senior brother. Yang Qing and White Tiger Great Sage could not help but smile and shake their heads together. It depends on the opponent's cultivation and strength. There is a limit. If it's a divine ability that contains a strong power of destruction, like eldest senior brother's Celestial Flaming Lotus and Tao Annihilation Floating Life, he probably can't seize it. Yang Qing looked at Lin Daohan with a calm gaze. Slowly she analyzed. White Tiger Great Sage looked at Lin Daohan with a scrutinizing gaze. He had been in Xianmen Tianzong for many years. Most of these years he had lived on Yujing Mountain, so he had a deep understanding of the human cultivation world. As the #1 holy land in the human cultivation world, Taishu Temple had a deep understanding of it. Although Xianmen Tianzong did not get along well with Taishu Temple, it would not belittle this behemoth that was almost at the same level as itself. Even after the war between the two realms, when Xianmen Tianzong officially surpassed Taishu Temple to become the #1 holy land in the human cultivation world, and when Taishu Temple hit its strength and bided its time, the successors of the celestial sect still attached great importance to it. As for Lin Daohan, the former #1 person of the younger generation in Taishu Temple, and now the new temple master, he naturally had a deep understanding of him. After Lin Daohan, there were countless outstanding figures in Taishu Temple. Whether it was Yan Mingyue, Pang Jie, or Shi Tianyi, they were just chasing after his footsteps. Although Shi Tianyi, the dual-pupiled person, had passed away many years ago, when he obtained Shi Tianhao's supreme Taoist root and combined it with his dual pupils, shocking the world, he was the brightest star among the younger generation in the divine land. It was widely acknowledged that as long as he did not die young, he was destined to become a legendary figure. Even though Shi Tianyi was just a teenager at that time, and was only at the golden core stage, or even the building foundation stage, the potential he showed was recognized by the entire human cultivation world. Not only was he the #1 person among the younger generation in the Great Qin dynasty, but he also had the demeanor of the #1 person among the younger generation in the entire divine land. Although the Great Zhou dynasty had the rise of Marquis Jinghuan Liang'an, compared to Shi Tianyi, who had the dual pupils and supreme Taoist root, he was somewhat weaker. However, within the Taishu Temple, including Kuang Heng, who later took Shi Tianyi in as a disciple, the unanimous evaluation of Shi Tianyi was that he might have the opportunity to challenge Lin Daohan's position among his peers in the future. Perhaps he would have the opportunity to try. However, in the recent decades, Lin Daohan had been too low-key, so it was difficult for outsiders to estimate his true level, and it was difficult for them to know exactly what he had up his sleeves. Lin Feng looked at Lin Daohan with interest. Excluding that thief Shirtiani, in the same generation, there were Taiyi and Lin Daohan who had established supreme Taoist root and obtained the divine light of creation. The Taishu temple really lives up to its name. Lin Daohan, who was in the void, looked at Zhu Yi and said calmly, "Easy, please excuse me." As he spoke, Taishu mystic light shrouded his body, and as the Yi Dao talisman flashed above his head, he suddenly turned around and counterattacked Zhu Yi. Streaks of golden lightning covered the sky, shuttling between the clouds like Brontosaurus, roaring angrily. The fifth stage of the Taishu Nine Heavens technique, Heavenly Cloud Dragon Lightning Wielding Technique. Streaks of golden lightning descended from the sky like rain, falling towards Zhu Yi and the Golden Nirvana Bridge. The Golden Nirvana Bridge shone brightly, and a golden rainbow crossed the sky, covering the void. For a moment, it was as if the sky had cleared up after the rain, and the thunderstorm disappeared. However, as the Yi Dao talisman flashed above Lin Daohan's head, he put his hands together, and the golden thunderstorm that was blocked by the Golden Nirvana Bridge actually twisted and gathered in the void, and then specifically targeted a few spots on the Golden Nirvana Bridge to attack. The attack suddenly became tricky, and it seemed like it was going to break through the divine light of the Nirvana Bridge. At the same time, the Taishu mark on the back of Lin Daohan's left hand flashed continuously, and the follow-up attacks came wave after wave, and they were extremely violent and ferocious. It was completely different from the leisurely and relaxed style of the cultivators of the Taishu temple. This was because his Yuluo divine light could only be maintained for a limited time, but more importantly, it was the most suitable strategy to fight against Zhu Yi in his current state. Zhu Yi raised his eyebrows slightly, nodded and said, "Temple Master Lin, you have given me a surprise. You really have a sharp eye to snatch my Yi Dao talisman, but it's a pity that it's not yours, and it's not yours after all. If you truly understood my Yi Dao, I believe you wouldn't have done this." Chapter 1450. One side lost, and the other side gained. The difference between them could not be measured with just a few miles, especially when it was one of the decisive factors like the Book of Changes. With the help of the Taishu engraving, Lin Daohan's strength increased further after he received the Yi Dao talisman. Zhu Yi used the Golden Nirvana Bridge to protect himself and blocked his opponent's storm-like attacks. However, as the Yi Dao talisman above Lin Daohan's head operated, there seemed to be rays of light shining in his beer and sea of consciousness. As they intertwined, the fog in front of him dissipated and revealed the truth. He continuously deduced the concept of the Golden Nirvana Bridge and Zhu Yi's magical powers. This allowed him to have a clear target and counter the enemy's moves. When Zhu Yi was just thinking about it, he reacted first. More importantly, under the deduction of the Yi Dao talisman, in the actual process of fighting with Zhu Yi, he figured out Zhu Yi's magical powers bit by bit. A magnificent scene appeared in front of his eyes. The vast and profound theory of the Book of Dao finally revealed the tip of the iceberg in front of Lin Daohan. Even with his tough state of mind and knowledge, there was a moment where he felt dizzy. He just wanted to be immersed in it forever and understand the complicated yet simple mystery of heaven and earth. Around Lin Daohan's body, rays of light faintly lit up and intertwined in all directions in the spirit sea. Merely this brief glimpse caused Lin Daohan to feel as if he'd obtained a new understanding towards his comprehension of the principles of the heavens and the earth. And some of the problems that troubled him on his path of cultivation seemed to have been easily solved. He felt as if he'd been suddenly enlightened, and he wished for nothing more than to enter into closed-door cultivation, right away to consider it clearly. As the magical powers around him surged, there seemed to be signs of sublimation, and became more profound. Lin Daohan's face was calm, but his thoughts were not calm. After witnessing and understanding the strength of the generations of Xianmen Tianzong's descendants, after experiencing the changes of the Tao of cause and effect and the Tai and void techniques, he was already prepared in his heart. The orthodox Xianmen sect of wonders was most likely above the orthodoxy of his own Taishu temple. Xianmen Tianzong had replaced Taishu temple as the #1 sacred place in the divine land. This was not only reflected in its current overall strength, but more importantly, its orthodoxy. However, he had never personally come into contact with the Tao Te Ching before, so he was unable to truly understand its profundities. Now that he had truly come into contact with the orthodox lineage of Xianmen Tianzong, his previous conjectures and speculations had been completely confirmed. There was no longer any doubt. At this moment, Lin Daohan could even feel the turmoil in his heart. On one hand, he was clearly aware that his nether-sieve divine light could only be maintained for a limited amount of time, so he had to end the battle quickly and strive to defeat Zhu Yi in the shortest amount of time possible. On the other hand, he only hoped that this battle could last as long as possible, so that he could carefully analyze the abstruse principles and concepts in front of him, and comprehend the endless profundities of heaven and earth. The former was a consideration of rationality and reality, while the latter was a natural yearning and curiosity of a cultivator towards the Tao of heaven and earth. A cultivator who could reach this stage would undoubtedly have an extremely strong curiosity and yearning towards the mysteries of heaven and earth. However, at this moment, Lin Daohan could only forcefully suppress this thought, maintain his rationality and calmness, and attack Zhu Yi. Although the Golden Nirvana Bridge was powerful, under the deduction of the Tao-changing talisman, Lin Daohan still seized the opportunity to avoid the strong and attack the weak. He did not fight with force, but sought the most suitable way to break it. He suddenly struck out with his palm. The power was fierce and vigorous, and in the middle of his palm, there was actually a swastika character flashing. In the past, when Buddhism was destroyed, a large number of secret teachings of Buddhism, including the Unmovable Buddha Sutra, flowed into Taishu Temple. Although Lin Daohan did not practice, he had read a lot. At this moment, under the flashing of the Tao-changing talisman, he actually mastered it, and as his mana revolved, he naturally activated the supernatural power of Buddhism. As he pushed his palm forward, the void actually lit up with specks of incense. The tiny sparks lit up between heaven and earth, densely packed, numbering in the billions. They were as small as corn, but they were extremely clear. Within these specks of sparks, there were pious chanting of Buddha. If one looked closely, each speck of sparks seemed to be an independent small world. In these innumerable small worlds, many figures appeared. There were gray-haired old women, pregnant women, rich and powerful women, ignorant children. There were all kinds of people, and there was not a single one. However, all of them had one thing in common. They were all softly chanting, "My Buddha is merciful." The endless power of incense seemed small, but as vast as the sea, they gathered together, forming a unique and majestic power. The power of incense gathered, turning into golden lamps in the void, and the Buddha's light shone on the world. Under the illumination of the lamps, the golden Paramitha bridge shook slightly, and the halos that enveloped it showed signs of solidifying and stagnating. With such a disturbance, the supernatural power of the golden Paramitha bridge suddenly showed signs of weakness, and Lin Daohan did not stop, activating a further attack towards Zhu Yi on the bridge. Zhu Yi raised his eyebrows slightly. At the end of the day, Buddhism is about cultivating oneself, not worshipping. It's just that people cannot cultivate and sink into the sea of bitterness. Life is full of difficulties, so the desire for others to save them is born. And this is the wrong path. Understanding oneself, everyone can become a Buddha, and work hard to improve oneself. Everyone is like a dragon, and you want to use the power of incense to disrupt the general trend of humanity, but how can you do it? His feet stepped on the golden Paramitha bridge, and his voice was as loud as the sky, echoing throughout the universe. So what is not yours will not be yours. You used the divine light of creation to forcefully take my talisman of E, but it's just an empty shell. The radiance of the golden Paramitha bridge suddenly brightened again, and rays of light shone on the world. Countless figures stood side by side on the bridge, and together, they let out deafening shouts, forming a rolling tide, all the way forward. The Buddha's light in the void did not dim down, and in the world of incense that gathered into the Buddha's light, the expressions of the people who were chanting and kneeling in worship gradually changed. They were no longer pious, but their Buddha nature was more abundant, as if they had received a blow to the head. And their hearts were enlightened, regardless of whether they were men or women, young or old, virtuous or foolish. Everyone's face more or less revealed a peaceful and quiet smile. Their eyes were clear, and from the inside out, there seemed to be a Buddha's light emitting from them. The Buddha's light became brighter, but it could not continue to affect the golden Paramitha bridge. The expanding golden rainbow stretched across heaven and earth, and it collided head-on with Lin Daohan's next attack, making it impossible for him to take another step forward. Lin Daohan looked at this scene with a calm expression, and he shook his head slightly. In the end, it still doesn't work? Lin Daohan was not disappointed that his Buddhist incense had failed to disrupt the golden Paramitha bridge's momentum. What he was concerned about was that streams of air were surging around Zhu Yi's return to void stage Dharma body, and a great force was added to his body, causing his aura to soar. Above Zhu Yi's head, another Taoist talisman of changes appeared. In the hands of his return to void stage Dharma body, another scroll gradually appeared, and the words Book of Changes were written on the cover. Lin Daohan's eyes flashed slightly. Under normal circumstances, if his opponent tried to condense and cast a new divine ability, he would not create a new one. Instead, he would further strengthen the first divine ability that he had control over, which was equivalent to increasing his power in a disguised form. The dim sifting godly light could transform the Tao of heaven and earth into something tangible, and it could temporarily take control. It was profound and unfathomable, and it was not something that could be dispelled by creating a new divine ability. However, at this moment, Zhu Yi was clearly activating the Tao of Changes again, and he was condensing the Taoist talisman of changes. This was not an illusion, nor was it an illusion, nor was it a forced display of power. Instead, the great Tao of Changes truly appeared with a single thought from Zhu Yi. Meanwhile, Lin Daohan could clearly feel that the Taoist talisman of changes above his head was slowly dissipating at this moment. The dim sifting godly light was still flashing between heaven and earth, and it was profound and unfathomable. However, at this moment, it was gradually losing control over the Taoist talisman of changes. The great Tao of Changes had returned to Zhu Yi. Zhu Yi looked at Lin Daohan, and he didn't hesitate to lift him up with the golden bridge of the other shore. He instantly arrived in front of Lin Daohan, and then streams of qi emerged from his body, and all kinds of great Tao were revealed. The orthodoxy of Buddhism, the orthodoxy of Heavenly Gate, the orthodoxy of the King of the Underworld, the orthodoxy of the Ruthless Sovereign, the orthodoxy of the Astro Sovereign, the orthodoxy of the Dark Sovereign, the orthodoxy of the primitive demon sect, and even the supreme Wangqing Dao and the void Yin-Yang Dao that Xianmen Tianzong had figured out by himself, and all the great Dao were guided by Zhu Yi's Xianmen arcane power, and all the great Dao rushed to different directions in the void, and then they were all destroyed together. An extremely horrifying and destructive power struck towards Lin Daohan. It was Zhu Yi's absolute Dao art. Once the art was used, everything in 10 directions would be destroyed. Lin Daohan could even feel that the body formed by his Yuan Shen was shaking violently. His body was protected by the great void mystic light, and he felt like his body was falling apart. Under the impact of the absolute Dao art, even the great void mystic light in the sky started to flicker, and it lost its usual plain and unfathomable abstruse state. Lin Daohan looked at the flashing Dao talisman of changes on top of Zhu Yi's head. Among you, the Yen monarch's power of Dao destruction is too strong. The Huang heavenly monarch's divine light of end can put an end to everything, and the origin divine light can return everything to its origin. Even the Yuluo divine light can't do anything to them. As for your Dao of scripture of changes, it comes from the idea of self-improvement, and it leads the trend of the human Dao. It is in harmony with the heaven and earth, and the human heart is the foundation. The 3 armies can take over the commander, but an ordinary man can't. He shook his head and sighed. Easy, your Tao of completion is indeed extraordinary. As he spoke, Lin Daohan's body turned, and the body formed by his Yuan Shen suddenly changed. It was as if he had turned into a huge talisman. Rays of light around the talisman extended into the distance, into the void, and then the talisman started to spin. As the mystic light circulated, It gradually formed a huge vortex, and from the center of the vortex, a majestic light pillar shot out from it. The divine runes and talismans that filled the sky gathered in the light pillar, and they turned into small talisman arrays. These talisman arrays then condensed together and operated together, guiding the surrounding spiritual chi of the great path of heaven and earth. With it as the center, they all rotated together. Wherever the light pillar passed, it swept through the void, and it dissolved the power of Zhu Yi's art of destruction. But at the same time, the golden Paramitha bridge stretched across the sky, and it had already landed on the vortex. Chapter 1451. The golden bridge of the Paramitha bridge turned into a long rainbow, crossing the void and landing on the whirlpool. Suppressed by the golden bridge of the Paramitha bridge, the rotation of the whirlpool suddenly became sluggish, and the magnificent light pillar lost its luster. After a pause, the whirlpool suddenly turned in the opposite direction. The huge whirlpool, which had a vast area, quickly converged into a point, turning into an inconspicuous speck of light and drifting away. As the Tao-changing talisman flickered above Zhu Yi's head, he could see where the speck of light went. The golden bridge of the Paramitha bridge seemed to be omnipresent, extending infinitely and continuing to chase after the speck of light. The light continued to shine between heaven and earth. The two sides, one chasing the other, were entangled in the void of the spirit sea. On the primeval golden lamp, the white tiger great sage was no longer crouching. He stared at the flowing light in the sky and said, "I already knew that Ez had such a cultivation, but this is the first time that I've seen Lin Daohan's true strength. He is quite extraordinary." Yangqing nodded and said, "This is under the condition that his dim sifting divine light can't be used against second senior brother. He can still contend with second senior brother's Paramitha bridge." Lin Daohan's cultivation base had been raised by the Taishu mark to roughly the same level as his own Dharma-ending realm cultivation base. Even without the Taishu sage temple by his side, Lin Daohan's strength could still fight against Dharma-ending realm demons, and he might even be able to win. Such strength was enough to amaze the world. Lin Feng looked at this scene and couldn't help but smile. Other than Xianmen Tianzong, all the top geniuses who had reached the primordial soul realm in the human cultivation world in recent years had encountered Zhu Yi. In the past, Zhu Honggu, who was in the Dao-fusing realm, could fight against strong demons in the first tribulation stage with his bare hands. Now Lin Daohan could do the same, but he still encountered Zhu Yi. Seeing this, Lin Feng couldn't help but laugh in his heart. Is this also a manifestation of good luck? Yangqing stared at the sky for a moment. His divine light of creation can't work. If the stalemate continues for a long time, he will eventually fall into a disadvantageous position. Second senior brother isn't someone who will give his opponent a chance to turn the tables. He turned to look at Lin Feng. Comparatively speaking, third senior brother. Lin Feng smiled faintly. Tianhao is holding the line for him. Moreover, I have some confidence in your third senior brother. This disciple naturally has confidence in third senior brother, said Yangqing. It's just that the king of the underworld has always been crafty and unpredictable. However, since Tianhao is also here, there shouldn't be any problems. After all, the king of the underworld was heavily injured by your hands. As she spoke, Yangqing raised her head and looked up at the independent gray domain space. Master, that place, Lin Feng's god of war clone smiled and said, "It's fine." As he spoke, thousands of the great path light streams between heaven and earth in the spiritual sea suddenly merged strangely, turning into an extremely magnificent and dazzling light belt that stretched between heaven and earth. The great path light stream trembled violently, stirring up the wind and clouds in all directions. Even Zhu Yi, Lin Daohan, Yu Hongyan, the heavenly wolf great sage, the monkey and golden cicada, who were in the process of fighting, looked askance at it. This was because this light stream was different from the usual ones. It actually showed a distinct color, which was as black as ink. In this pitch-black light stream, one could vaguely see light shadows floating up and down, turning into images of all living beings. There were powerful dragons, kunpengs, taotais, and other great demons and fierce beasts. There were ordinary humans, ordinary birds and beasts, flowers, birds, fish, and insects. There were towering trees, low shrubs, vast grasslands, and wetland moss. All kinds of living beings emerged from it. Then they all withered and died in an instant, leaving only white bones and desolation on the ground. However, this scene did not give off an eerie and terrifying feeling. Instead, it made people feel that it was only natural. Their hearts were filled with peace, as if they were watching the home that all living beings should return to, eternal peace. Light shadows appeared one after another. In the end, even the seemingly lifeless mountains, rivers, sand, stones, wind, rain, and clouds seemed to be bestowed with life. Then they entered a state of death, eternal slumber. Yang Qing's eyes focused. This is the great heaven primordial world's Tao of death. It is the ultimate manifestation of the Tao of death in the spiritual sea. It has condensed into a physical form. Then, he turned his gaze to the other side. He saw the great path light streams vibrate together in the void. Then, thousands of light streams strangely fused together, turning into a magnificent light belt. It also revealed an obvious milky white color. Within that light belt, light shadows also appeared continuously. It was the complete opposite of the scene in the black light belt. Everything was full of vitality, reviving and growing. New lives were constantly being born. Yang Qing's breathing quickened slightly. He stretched out his right hand and opened his palm. There was a tiny piece of sand there. It was extremely inconspicuous, but it seemed as if Yang Qing had to use all his strength to hold it steadily in his palm. He took a deep breath and regained his calmness. He stared at the two thick bands of light in front of him, one black and one white, fluctuating ceaselessly in heaven and earth. This is the real fight between Third Brother and the Emperor of Underworld. Lin Feng smiled. Tianhao has blocked his path from the outside, and Little Lin has blocked his path from the back. There is no way forward, and there are pursuers behind. It will be difficult for him to escape this time. If he had a choice, the king of the underworld would naturally not be interested in fighting with Wang Lin in the spiritual sea. Although the situation seemed to be changing drastically because of the crack in the Dead Sea, the king of the underworld, who had already been seriously injured by Lin Feng, did not intend to continue getting involved. To him, the situation was no longer out of his control. It was completely out of his plans. There was no need to take any risks at this time. Lin Feng was still in the spiritual sea. Even if he gained the upper hand in the fight with Wang Lin, there was no benefit to speak of. Moreover, he had been injured by Lin Feng, and his strength had been seriously damaged. It was not suitable for him to continue fighting with others. However, Shi Tianhao, who was cruising in the periphery, blocked him with the Great Celestial Wheel. In a sense, when he left the Netherworld Sea, Shi Tianhao had actually chased him all the way into the spiritual sea. After being blocked by Shi Tianhao and slightly delayed, Wang Lin, who was behind him, had already caught up. Shi Tianhao activated the Blue Sky All Heavens formation. The Sky City suppressed, and the Great Celestial Wheel hung high. It directly blocked off the space-time in front of him, blocking the king of the underworld's path. Although his face was pale and his aura was much weaker, the king of the underworld still had a majestic aura. Seeing that the space-time was sealed, he had no time to break out if he could not defeat Wang Lin. Therefore, he simply stopped in his tracks and stood in mid-air. He looked around at the realm that had turned into a blue sky. He didn't say anything, and his gaze finally fell on Wang Lin. The young man had a cold expression. He was dressed in purple, and his long white hair was loose behind him. His gaze was indifferent. The king of the underworld stared at Wang Lin and sized him up. Suddenly he smiled. It's not without reason that N and the others, as well as the disciples and disciples of Samsara, see you as a thorn in their side. Wang Lin did not speak. However, with him as the center, the scenery of the world suddenly changed. The blue sky formed by the Blue Sky All Heavens formation instantly turned into the dusky yellow springs. Wisps of black deathly aura spread in all directions. Silently, the yellow springs river of forgetfulness flowed. A bridge of forgetfulness was erected on it, leading to the pitch-black Emperor Yan's hall. The door of Emperor Yan's hall opened. Two light wheels, one black and one white, one life and one death, spun rapidly. In the depths of the hall, a mirror-like stone stood erect, reflecting layers of unimaginable scenes. And on this stone of 3 lives, there was an existence of light. It was faintly discernible, and was filled with a mysterious aura of power. The king of the underworld's gaze swept across the Yellow Springs Road, the River of Forgetfulness, the Bridge of Forgetfulness, Emperor Yan's Hall, the Stone of Three Lives, and finally landed on the hazy light above the Stone of Three Lives. Seeing this light, the king of the underworld's gaze wavered a little. Slowly he nodded. "You have a good master." He walked leisurely in the air, as though he was on a field trip. He walked into the Nine Hells world formed by Wang Lin's spiritual power. To others, the Yellow Springs world was a burial ground. But to the king of the underworld, it was as though he was walking on flat ground, relaxed and content. Bone claws stretched out from the foundation of the Yellow Springs Road. They were originally going to grab the king of the underworld's body, but halfway there, they all prostrated themselves. The torrential Yellow Springs true water, which purified everything in the world, came to a complete stop in front of the king of the underworld. The entire river of forgetfulness was like a frozen glacier. The king of the underworld did not step onto the still river of forgetfulness. Instead, he slowly walked onto the bridge of forgetfulness. As he walked, the green-black stone bridge was completely silent, without the slightest reaction. He came to the front of Emperor Yan's hall. In his eyes, black and white light alternated. Within Emperor Yan's hall, the two wheels of light, one black and one white, had originally been spinning rapidly. At this moment, their speed also slowed down, until they finally came to a stop. The king of the underworld passed through the hall, and came before the Stone of Three Lives. He took a look. Is it mainly because of Rulai Taoist? He formed a seal with both hands and then struck out. A beam of white light flew out, and then rapidly turned into a multicolored light. In this multicolored light, one could see countless lights and shadows alternating, revealing the myriad changes of the mortal world. Many carvings vaguely showed the city walls and countryside, the joys and sorrows of life, love and hate, and the countless entanglements of the mortal world. Thousands of mortal worlds and thousands of karma appeared at the same time, shrouding the Stone of Three Lives. It temporarily blinded the power to predict the future of karma. If this was the future star-glazed Buddha Lord's Three Lives karma curse, it would be difficult for the king of the underworld to be so blinded. However, his opponent was Wang Lin, and the result was different. Even though Wang Lin had the Stone of Three Lives and could still sort out the thousands of threads and clues of karma, it was not something that could be accomplished in a single move. For a battle of their cultivation level, countless changes happened in an instant. If there was a slight delay, the present would become the past and the future would become the past. After blinding the Stone of Three Lives, the king of the underworld lifted his head to look at the blurry light above. His face revealed a look of deep thought. And at this moment, the king of the underworld's heart stirred. He retracted his gaze and looked behind the Stone of Three Lives. There, a figure sat on the throne. He was dressed in a black dragon robe and had a flat crown on his head. He looked like the Lord of the Underworld. His facial features were no different from Wang Lin's, but he was cold and dignified, looking down on the common people. He looked a little like the king of the underworld. When the king of the underworld saw this, he felt a little strange. He smiled and said, "Come down." As he spoke, Wang Lin, who was sitting on the throne and wearing the crown on his head, suddenly became unsteady. It was as though he was about to fall from the throne. His appearance looked a little comical. It was as though a fake emperor on a stage had met the real son of heaven who had coincidentally arrived. But when his spiritual sense and spiritual power came into contact with Wang Lin's figure, the king of the underworld could not laugh. Emperor Yan's hall shook at this moment. The black and white wheels of light that had been almost still started to rotate again. Chapter 1452. As Emperor Yan's hall shook, the space began to shrink rapidly, forming a shackle that trapped the king of the underworld within. As for Wang Lin, who had fallen from the throne, his figure had disappeared, as though he had melded into Emperor Yan's hall. The king of the underworld turned his head abruptly, his gaze piercing through Emperor Yan's hall, and looking at the outside world. He saw that the road to the underworld, the river of forgetfulness, and the bridge of helplessness that he had crossed previously were also shaking at this moment. A few figures suddenly appeared, and they all looked like Wang Lin. A solitary and stubborn young man walked on the road to the Yellow Springs. Apart from his resolute expression, he looked ordinary. In his silent and stubborn eyes, there was still a pure and innocent heart. In the face of difficulties, there was also yearning and longing for the future. An expressionless youth had his eyes tightly shut. He did not speak, did not move, and stood in the river of hell. He was like a stubborn rock, but also a part of the river. His entire person seemed to be hovering between life and death. An ordinary and leisurely-looking young man with a calm expression and a smile stood on the bridge of helplessness, as though he was admiring the scenery around him. The stone of 3 lives in front of the king of the underworld suddenly lit up, and the colorful light that shrouded it dissipated. On the mirror-like surface of the stone of 3 lives, a figure appeared. It was also the figure of Wang Lin. This was an elderly Wang Lin. His face was lined with wrinkles, and the marks of time were etched on it. Only his eyes were quiet and deep. But no matter which Wang Lin it was, they all had one similarity. There was a vertical demonic mark between their brows. Seeing this demonic mark, the king of the underworld's eyes flashed. Primordial Demon Sutra, Primordial Heart Demon Concealment Curse? Although the king of the underworld had already perished in the ancient times when the primordial devil cult rose to its peak, he was not completely unaware of the outside world in the following years. His disciples, Taoist Reincarnation, Taoist Huangquan, Taoist Yuming, and the master of the underworld Hall, Su Anda, were also active in the vast thousand worlds. The king of the underworld knew a lot about the colossal world over the years, so he was no stranger to the primitive demon sect. However, at this moment, Wang Lin's technique seemed a little strange and unfamiliar. The king of the underworld sized him up seriously. You combined your spells and divine abilities with some existences, and severed all of them into external bodies? Wang Lin did not reply. His real body was nowhere to be seen, and his avatars were forming hand seals together. The road to the underworld, river of forgetfulness, bridge of helplessness, Emperor Yan's hall, and the stone of 3 lives shook together, forming an even more condensed 9 helplessness world. It was as though the real Hades had descended. Streaks of black gas that could be seen with the naked eye surged out, surrounding the king of the underworld and pressing towards him. After the initial shock, the king of the underworld regained his composure. He said nonchalantly, "Then I will just have to put in some effort to kill you a few more times." As he spoke, his pitch-black eyes suddenly changed, and streaks of white light shot out from within. These white lights were filled with vitality, nurturing all life. Wherever the white light reached, it blended with the black gas that was sweeping over. Both sides did not clash fiercely, but instead intertwined. The black and white gas swirled continuously, and finally turned into hundreds and thousands of spinning roulette in the air. These roulette were scattered throughout the void, displaying the mysteries of life and death. As they spun, the true meaning of the 6 paths of reincarnation of all life could be seen. The king of the underworld extended a finger and tapped lightly. Thousands of black and white roulette shot out in all directions, bombarding the 9 helplessness world formed from Wang Lin's spiritual power. At this moment, Wang Lin's avatars had all disappeared, and his real body appeared before the king of the underworld. He suddenly took a step forward and immediately appeared near the king of the underworld, and then pointed a finger at the king of the underworld's chest. Wang Lin had already manifested his return to void dharma physique. Slowly, the Tai Chi diagram on his forehead spun. However, the stone of 3 lives, Emperor Yan's hall, and other existences that had formed his return to void dharma physique had all disappeared. This made him look no different from an ordinary person, except that he was dressed in black, and as his clothes fluttered, he blended into the void. He suddenly pointed a finger at the king of the underworld's chest. Everything in the 9 helplessness world seemed to have come to a standstill, and only this finger continued to advance. The king of the underworld had a good understanding of Wang Lin, and he knew that he was a pure spiritual cultivator. However, this finger of Wang Lin's was clearly a martial mystique. At this moment, from the heart of Wang Lin's return to void dharma physique, an extremely ferocious power of blood and chi suddenly erupted. It was as though layers of universes were being destroyed together. It started out as a tiny dot, but it expanded rapidly, filling the entire heaven and earth. Under the augmentation of this powerful power of blood and qi, Wang Lin's finger also became extremely terrifying. It was as though an endless demonic abyss had appeared between heaven and earth, and demons were dancing in a frenzy. Looking down into the abyss, it was as though looking up at a towering tower. Everything in the world was concentrated at the bottom of the abyss, on the tower. Turning into demons, they worshipped the bottom of the abyss and the top of the tower. The tip of Wang Lin's finger, the top of the tower, and the bottom of the abyss, all became one at this moment. They were concentrated at a single point, and it was so heavy that it could not be any heavier. It triggered the power of the entire demonic abyss, and it was pointed at the king of the underworld's chest together. This was the pinnacle of martial mystique recorded in the Primordial Demon Sutra of the Primordial Demon Sect, the bow of all demons. This unexpected and sudden move completely overturned the king of the underworld's previous understanding of Wang Lin. Even with his cultivation base, he was caught off guard for a moment, and Wang Lin closed in on him with ease. At this time, even if he wanted to dodge, his body had already been suppressed by the bow of all demons. His entire body was involuntarily drawn towards the abyss, towards the top of the tower. However, the king of the underworld had dominated for a long time, and he was not easy to deal with. He simply stood where he was without moving, and a half-black, half-white underworld Dao fruit appeared in the air in front of his chest, right between Wang Lin's finger and his heart. Then the Dao fruit suddenly exploded, turning into black streams of light that filled the sky. Netherworld Primordial Annihilation Curse. Seeing this, Wang Lin's eyes immediately erupted with a shocking light. In his left pupil, two beams of light, one black and one white, intersected, turning into a beam of light in the shape of a black and white cross, enveloping the king of the underworld from the void. Hit! With a light shout from Wang Lin, the heaven-defying fate-changing curse was activated, reversing the principles of karma and changing the past. Under the radiance of the black and white cross, the attack that had been blocked by the Netherworld Primordial Annihilation Curse still headed towards the king of the underworld's chest. The king of the underworld's eyes also flickered with flowing light, and he let out a long sigh. Before me, all is silent. Netherworld ritual was activated, and the three-tiered black altar was erected. Then, the life and death underworld Dao fruit was sacrificed within, and the altar shattered, turning into a silent black light that blocked in front of the king of the underworld. Because the Netherworld Primordial Annihilation Curse did not have the desired effect, the king of the underworld attacked a second time. Wang Lin's finger was almost about to touch the king of the underworld's chest, and the suppressive force made the heart of the king of the underworld feel numb. At the critical moment, the black light screen appeared between the two of them, narrowly blocking Wang Lin's bow of all demons. Wang Lin's eyes flashed, and the heaven-defying fate-changing curse was activated once more. It was deathly silent, and the silent black light screen seemed to completely isolate the domain. The king of the underworld could not see any danger or tribulation. It isolated spiritual qi, physical flesh and blood, the various principles and laws, and the connection of karma and fate. Death was the end of everything. Here, everything returned to a quiet eternal slumber, and all was silent. Wang Lin's heaven-defying fate-changing curse was abnormally tyrannical, causing the black light screen to ripple like water. Although it did not emit any sound, its restrictive protective power had already begun to rapidly decline. The bow of all demons continued to increase its strength, taking advantage of the opportunity to pierce through the black light screen. But the king of the underworld had already taken this opportunity to catch his breath. He erected another netherworld altar, sacrificed the Dao fruit, and then strode forward. Behind him, he left behind a completely gray path. Wherever the king of the underworld passed, everything lost its vitality and turned into deathly stillness. Behind me, there is no life, the king of the underworld said in a low voice, and he rapidly increased the distance between him and Wang Lin. And the deathly silent path he left behind made Wang Lin think twice if he wanted to continue chasing, especially if he used his martial arts mystique to pursue. The situation was even more awkward. But in Wang Lin's eyes, the black and white crosses intersected once again, and the heaven-defying fate-changing curse was activated. Stop. With this command, the king of the underworld's figure actually involuntarily became sluggish. He still tried to move forward, but his movements became extremely sluggish. It was a comical scene, and no one could laugh. Even though he had been injured by Lin Feng previously, the king of the underworld's cultivation and strength were still not to be underestimated. He forcefully resisted Wang Lin's heaven-defying fate-changing curse. Above his head, black and white light intertwined, forming a huge wheel that completely covered the sky above. The wheel was half black and half white, and as it rotated, it seemed like the samsara of fate. At this moment, the wheel's rotation also became sluggish. At this moment, Wang Lin's domineering heaven-defying fate-changing curse seemed to be reversing the fate of all living beings. The king of the underworld, who was proficient in the samsara Tao of life and death, also had an extremely deep understanding of fate and the dharma and logos of fate. Seeing this, Wang Lin suddenly retracted his finger. That earth-shaking violent qi and blood also instantly retracted back to where Wang Lin's heart was, once again turning into a seemingly insignificant. In between his eyebrows, in the center of the Tai Chi diagram, a vertical demonic pattern split open. That demonic pattern was above the Tai Chi diagram, but it did not rotate along with the Tai Chi diagram. Instead, it remained vertical. The Tai Chi diagram continued to rotate. The dharma and aura of dharmic powers were not affected at all. Above Wang Lin's head, a hazy ball of light flashed. It was the same shape as the light on the stone of 3 lives earlier, and it caught the attention of the king of the underworld. At this moment, as the light swayed, a figure gradually swayed from within. Seeing that figure, the king of the underworld immediately frowned. A distant and unfamiliar sense of familiarity surged in his heart. As the dharma and aura in the void continued to vibrate, the figure in the ball of light became clearer. Then it gradually stepped out of the ball of light and arrived in this world. Chapter 1453. In the ball of light above Wang Lin's head, a silhouette became clearer and clearer, gradually materializing, as though it was a real person. That silhouette walked out of the ball of light. The king of the underworld looked at him, and for a moment, his face turned as black as the bottom of a pot, revealing such intense emotions, which was rare. The person in front of him was wearing a brown linen robe that looked extremely shabby. He had an arrogant and fearless expression on his face, as though he had traveled through the ages and come back to this world. The king of the underworld seemed to sigh, and it seemed like he was muttering to himself as he said word by word. 1. Qi Yang. Although he knew in his heart that this could not be the real Wen Qiang, but a manifestation of Wang Lin's strange technique, the king of the underworld was still greatly shaken. Having lived for a long time, the king of the underworld was one of the most ancient existences among the top experts of the present world. He had seen too many ups and downs, great storms and great waves. He had seen too many powerful opponents, and there was no lack of people who were stronger than him. For example, Lin Feng, who had just defeated and seriously injured him. However, in the depths of the king of the underworld's heart, the opponent that he cared about the most was still the Red Emperor of the ancient era, Wen Qiang, who had overshadowed the 3 sovereigns. Others might not know, but the king of the underworld knew very well that strictly speaking, the human emperors who had been overshadowed by Wen Qiang were not just 3. Including him, there should actually be 4 sovereigns. In the era when Wen Qiang stood in the divine land, the king of the underworld, Daoist Xiandu, had already surpassed the human emperors of that time, Xia Huang and Xia Fangyu. However, facing Wen Qiang, who was at the peak of his power, and Yan Xinghe and the other experts of the Taishu temple behind him, the king of the underworld had chosen to lay low. It was only after Wen Qiang battled Jihuang Shenyuan and disappeared from the Great Thousand Worlds that the king of the underworld officially stepped forward and replaced Xia Huang as the human emperor. The king of the underworld had waited patiently during that period of seclusion. However, that period of time had undoubtedly left a deep impression on the king of the underworld. Wen Qiang was the person he feared the most in his life. Even after the battle with Jihuang Shenyuan and his disappearance, the king of the underworld continued to investigate his whereabouts in secret after he ascended the throne. This was the source of the king of the underworld's exploration and understanding of the king of the underworld. The king of the underworld, who had personally witnessed the end of Wuxia, naturally knew that the figure in front of him could not be the resurrection of Wuxia. He was skilled in Dao skills and knew that Wang Lin was proficient in the primordial demon cult's highest achievement, the primordial heart demon concealment curse, which was unpredictable and ever-changing. Therefore, after some thought, he had already understood. You intercepted my emotions and consciousness, turning my illusory thoughts into reality? The king of the underworld's expression became cold and indifferent again. Within this, there's even a portion of Sikong Yu's ghost fear curse mixed in? He really didn't die in your hands for nothing. When he first saw that ball of light, the king of the underworld had sensed that there were many profound changes in it. However, he had not expected it to have such a magical effect. Along the way, Wang Lin had used his own heavenly virtue scripture as the foundation, combined with the primordial heart demon concealment curse, and his own understanding of the Tao of heaven and earth to create the primordial demon heart seal. It was obvious that he had dug out the most terrifying existence in the deepest part of the king of the underworld's heart, and then materialized it here. The strange and domineering part of it was that even if the king of the underworld himself understood and firmly believed that the Wuxia before him was not real, as long as his most primordial fear and dread was real, then the existence that materialized here would irrevocably become real. Different people would naturally have different dread in the deepest part of their hearts. However, when it was used on the king of the underworld, it was a huge joke. This was because in his memories and emotions, the person in this position was Wuxia. The Wuxia materialized by Wang Lin's magic was naturally far from the real person. However, to the king of the underworld, the mere sight of this figure made his scalp go numb. Even if he defeated this opponent who was far from the real person, it did not mean that he could break this mental barrier. Therefore, to the king of the underworld, the situation before him was that he could neither fight nor not fight. As for the king of the underworld, he naturally could not suppress the rage in his heart against Wang Lin, who had dug out the hidden will in his heart in such a way that was close to humiliating him. However, he was, after all, a veteran of hundreds of battles and rich in experience. He forced himself to calm down and regain his composure. Before the war between the two realms, after confirming Wuxia's death in the underworld sea, the shadow that shrouded his heart had actually dissipated significantly. Otherwise, the outcome today would have been even worse. The king of the underworld calmed his state of mind. This was the true way to resolve Wang Lin's primordial awakening demon heart seal. At the same time, white light shone on his left hand, and black qi wrapped around his right hand. Together they gathered in front of his chest, forming the image of the cycle of life and death. As the huge will rotated, it formed a strange, distorted state. It was not just limited to life and death, but also used this as a foundation to draw in other laws. The illusory reality was shaken, and the gradually forming figure of Wuxia became illusory again. It seemed like it was about to retreat back into the ball of light above Wang Lin's head. Seeing this, the taiji symbol on Wang Lin's brow continued to rotate. In the void, 5 figures appeared and disappeared. Together with Wang Lin's real body, they stood in 6 different directions, surrounding the king of the underworld in the center. They were the 5 avatars that Wang Lin had obtained from slaying the road to the underworld: the River of Forgetfulness, the Bridge of Helplessness, Emperor Yan's Hall, and the Stone of 3 Lives. At this moment, Wang Lin's real body continued to use the primordial awakening demon heart seal, while his 5 avatars were simultaneously forming the same spiritual art. They looked distorted, yet serene, and extremely strange. Streaks of black qi and streaks of golden light appeared together. They intertwined in the sky to form a world that opposed yet blended together, shrouding the king of the underworld within. Unlike the 9 hells world from before, this world at this moment was as black as ink on half, while the other half was bright and clear. Tens of thousands of twisted and ferocious evil spirits were struggling and howling. Their howls were enough to drive one mad and plunge into the abyss. Opposite them, there were indeed many pure and benevolent Buddhas sitting in the lotus position, chanting scriptures and chanting Buddhist scriptures. The 2 sides were clearly separated, but they were in the same world. One was a world where the domain of demons and the Pure Land coexisted, and even blended together. This world was like a Taiji diagram formed by demonic qi and Buddhist light. Slowly, they opposed each other, but also blended together. Before the king of the underworld, a tall and skinny figure appeared. It was displaying the essence of withering and flourishing, and its figure constantly alternated between plump and skinny. It was a giant with 2 heads and 1,000 arms. Half of its body was black, and the other half was colored glass. Of the 2 heads, one was solemn and dignified, filled with wisdom and enlightenment. The other was cold and vicious, with a crack between its brows. Red light flashed from the crack, and it was extremely vicious. The arms that were closer to the Buddha's head had an eye in the palm of each arm. The eyes were compassionate and serene, and they could see through the karma of the mortal world. And the arms that were closer to the heads of the evil demons also had an eye in the palm of each arm. The eyes were violent and bloodthirsty, and extremely evil. The gaze of the 1,000 arms and 1,000 eyes fell on the king of the underworld at the same time. Instantly his mind was shaken, and he almost lost control. The king of the underworld grunted. Looking closely, he saw that in this pure land of demons, the boundary between reality and illusion seemed to have been erased once again. As the void changed, Wang Lin's primeval demon heart seal flowed more smoothly. In the light above his head, Wen Qiang's figure became clearer. And what made the king of the underworld even more shocked was that above Wang Lin's head, there was another light slowly condensing. Slowly, a figure appeared in that light, and it became clearer and clearer. When he got a clear look at the person's facial features, the king of the underworld's expression became even stranger. The person was dressed in a purple robe with wide sleeves. His long hair was let loose, and there was a faint smile on his face. Who else could it be but Lin Feng? The king of the underworld took a deep breath, and his face darkened. He felt the anger in his heart grow stronger, and he wanted nothing more than to sink this junior before him, who kept exposing his scars, into the world of the dead, and never to reincarnate. But just as the rash and violent thoughts rose, the king of the underworld became more alert. He suddenly realized that his control over his emotions was getting weaker, and he could easily be affected. And his state of mind, which he was trying hard to calm down, was becoming more and more turbulent, far more than before. Besides Wen Qiang's figure turning from an illusory thought to reality, Lin Feng's figure also appeared. This was the evidence that the king of the underworld's state of mind was becoming more and more unstable. The king of the underworld suddenly raised his head, and saw Wang Lin's 6 pairs of eyes shining with a strange splendor at the same time. As the splendor flickered, it was breathtaking. Although this was the first time the king of the underworld had personally faced Wang Lin's yin-yang mantra, the king of the underworld had already deeply experienced the soundless, formless strangeness of it. Yuanshiju Devil's Heart Seal, Yin-Yang Mantra, Bodhiju Devil's Heart Seal. Wang Lin's various techniques were unleashed at the same time. It was domineering and strange. Even a powerhouse like the king of the underworld, who had lived for countless years, would always unknowingly fall into its trap. If it were not for the king of the underworld's firm will, vast knowledge, shocking magical powers, and sufficient vigilance, he would have already failed countless times. After being injured by Lin Feng, the impact is too great. My injuries can't be healed. If I continue to fight with this man, I feel powerless. Otherwise, I might as well use force to break through his technique. Why would I need to go through all this trouble? The king of the underworld shook his head. He saw that Wen Qiang's figure was about to walk out of the ball of light, and Lin Feng's figure was becoming clearer and more real. He knew that he could not delay any longer. He suddenly clasped his palms together. Rays of light shot out from his body. They were neither black nor white, and instead gave off a chaotic feeling that was difficult to understand. The king of the underworld's clasped palms slowly separated at this moment. He opened his arms and extended them to his sides. 2 incomparably huge black altars with 3 levels appeared on either side of the king of the underworld. The life and death nether Dao fruit was thrown into the nether altars on either side, and then sacrificed. The huge black altars shattered with a loud bang, turning into rays of flowing light. Before me, all is silent. Behind me, there is no life. The black screen of light covered the sky and blocked out the influence that Wang Lin's technique had on his body. It caused Wen Qiang and Lin Feng's figures to slow down slightly. At the same time, rays of black light spread out in all directions, turning the entire world into a deathly silence. Even the demonic domain Pure Land formed by Wang Lin's consciousness and magical powers seemed to be walking on the path of death. Within it, demons were destroyed one after another, Buddhas passed away one after another. All powerful existences seemed to be walking on the path of death at the same time. The king of the underworld flipped his palm, and a tattered ancient book appeared in his hand. More than half of the book had been torn in the middle, and it was barely held together. It looked miserable and dilapidated. However, as the king of the underworld pointed, the ancient book seemed to have regained its final radiance, and it shone with light again. Chapter 1454. The ancient book was naturally the creation artifact belonging to the king of the underworld, the Book of Life and Death. In his previous battle with Lin Feng, the king of the underworld had been heavily injured, and this artifact had been damaged by Lin Feng as well. Now that its vitality had been greatly damaged, it would not be easy to recover. It looked extremely wretched and dilapidated. But now, as the king of the underworld tapped the Book of Life and Death with a finger, the Book of Life and Death instantly glowed with brilliant light. Beam after beam of light rushed out, intertwining in the void and manifesting a gray world that looked dark and silent. The body formed by the king of the underworld's nascent divinity flickered with rays of light that were neither black nor white. These rays of light enveloped the world formed by the Book of Life and Death, and then engulfed it. A wheel that was half black and half white appeared above the king of the underworld's head. The king of the underworld reached out a hand and placed it on the edge of the wheel, causing it to stop spinning. But as the wheel stopped spinning, the void between heaven and earth shook violently. Within the world of the spirit sea, thousands of rays of the great Tao pulsed together, rays of light flowing ceaselessly. Among them, there were many rays of light that split into two paths, each with thousands of rays. Then they converged and merged, forming two extremely majestic and dazzling bands of light that traversed the sky, passing through the blue sky all heaven's formation that Shi Tianhao presided over. The two majestic rays of light revealed specific colors, one black and one white, as if they were physical. The black ray of light manifested the pinnacle of the Tao of death. Thousands of scenes appeared as all living beings walked towards the end of death, while the white ray of light manifested the pinnacle of the Tao of creation, the growth of all things and the birth of life. The two rays of light were like two endless heavenly rivers that traversed the void, converging from two different directions at the center of the wheel that the king of the underworld held up. At the center of the wheel, where the black and white rays of light intersected, a great suction force emanated, engulfing everything in its surroundings. Wang Lin's dermic power and divine sense were sucked into it, along with the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. Even the blue sky formed by the blue sky all heaven's formation was sucked into it. Shi Tianhao, who had been holding the line for Wang Lin and had not made a move, also appeared in the void at this moment. He stared at the king of the underworld with a burning gaze. He could clearly sense that the king of the underworld's attack was no trifling matter. His third elder brother didn't have a destinable treasure with him, so this exchange was truly dangerous. Wang Lin's white hair fluttered in the wind as he watched the scene unfold with an indifferent expression. His main body was still standing where it was, but his 5 avatars were already flying uncontrollably towards the center of the samsara cycle. The king of the underworld took a deep look at Wang Lin and said calmly, "You are also well versed in the Tao of life and death. Today let's enter reincarnation together, and see who lives and who dies." With that, his body flew up and was actually sucked into the vortex in the center of the wheel. Rather than being sucked in, it was more accurate to say that the king of the underworld had entered reincarnation on his own accord. As the king of the underworld entered it, the wheel began to spin again with a loud rumble, drawing the unique black and white light of the great path in the spiritual sea between heaven and earth to spin and converge together. The wheel grew larger and larger until it covered the heavens and the earth and filled the surroundings, as though it was the common destination of all existences in the world. As the life and death cycle rotated, the suction force became even stronger, pulling Wang Lin's true body towards it. Wang Lin's expression was calm and composed. and a rare faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Shi Tianhao stepped on the city in the sky and descended from the sky. The great celestial wheel was above his head, and his entire being was like a god suppressing the heavens. As he descended, the rotation of the samsara cycle seemed to slow down a little. Third senior brother? Shi Tianhao looked at Wang Lin, and Wang Lin shook his head. He's putting himself at death's door to come back to life. He wants to discuss the samsara with me and decide life and death. With you by my side, even if he fights me to the death and wins in the end, it will still be very difficult for him to escape safely. Stepping into the samsara cycle of life and death is actually a greater chance for him. If he doesn't enter it and only suppresses it from the outside, at most leaving the book of life and death behind in the end, he can use the samsara to escape. Wang Lin explained the situation to Shi Tianhao clearly. Although this samsara means that his rebirth this time is completely wasted, and his strength is completely dissipated, and it is unknown whether he can wake up again in the future, since he dares to do this, he definitely has a backup plan. As he spoke, Wang Lin stepped forward, walking toward the samsara cycle of life and death. He was completely at ease, and his tone was calm. With Master here, with us here, the more time passes, the less chance he has. But this time, I don't want to let him go. Rebirth again and again, it's really too annoying. I know he's provoking me to enter the samsara cycle and fight to the death with him, but does he really think that no one can kill him? He was seriously injured by Master, and I don't even dare to fight him. What else is there to say? Shi Tianhao's gaze fell on the samsara cycle of life and death, and he said softly, "Third senior brother, you and that guy are both proficient in the death substitution resurrection technique. If you don't enter the samsara cycle, it will be very difficult for you to kill the other, and it will take a long time. But once you enter the samsara cycle of life and death, all the death substitution resurrection techniques will be ineffective. Once you die, you can't come out again." Wang Lin had cut out his 5 clones, and under most circumstances, this was equivalent to 5 lives. Apart from a few special circumstances, as long as he dispersed all of his clones, it would be extremely difficult to kill him. Although the life substitution heavenly pill was no longer effective on him, at least Wang Lin still had his own extreme nirvana, as well as the third finger of the Yellow Springs finger, the finger of rebirth. In addition, Wang Lin was also proficient in the underworld rebirth technique of the king of the underworld's lineage, and the reincarnation sex reincarnation art of rebirth. Even if some of the techniques could be broken by others and rendered useless, Wang Lin's death substitution resurrection technique was too rich. Under these circumstances, it was not worth it to chase after the samsara cycle and fight the king of the underworld to the death. The overall situation was extremely favorable to Xianmen Tianzong. Even if the king of the underworld escaped unscathed this time, it would be difficult for him to stir up any more trouble. Moreover, if he entered the samsara cycle now, it would be equivalent to giving up everything he currently had. Even if he could return in the future, it would be difficult for him to cause great trouble. This could also be considered the decision that the king of the underworld had made. He was willing to pay a price that ordinary people could not bear to fight for a chance at survival. I dare to pay such a price. If you want to kill me, do you have the confidence and courage to do so? If you really dare to chase after me into the samsara cycle, then I will fight you. Let's see who will sink into the samsara cycle and never be able to escape." Wang Lin's answer was, "If you want to fight, then I will fight." He arrived before the samsara cycle of life and death. As his hands moved, a rune condensed in the void and fell towards Shi Tianhao. Shi Tianhao stretched out his palm and let the rune fall into his palm. It was as if it was deeply engraved in his flesh. The king of the underworld had merged his body with the book of life and death to form the samsara cycle. Once he entered it, there was no turning back. Even if Wang Lin and Shi Tianhao did not chase after him, if he wanted to escape, he could only truly enter the samsara cycle of life and death. He had to disperse everything about his life and enter the realm of death, then wait for reincarnation and rebirth. Wang Lin wanted to enter and kill the king of the underworld, not to die with him. Naturally, he had to make arrangements in advance so that he could escape the samsara cycle after he won. Of course, if he died at the hands of the king of the underworld, then all these preparations and arrangements would be meaningless. Shi Tianhao looked at Wang Lin's back and did not stop him. This was Wang Lin's decision, and he had enough confidence in Wang Lin. Third brother, I wish you success. Slowly Shi Tianhao said. When Wang Lin heard this, he stopped and turned back with a smile. Don't worry, I'll be back very soon. Stay where you are and don't fall asleep. Shi Tianhao smiled. That depends on how fast you are. Wang Lin did not say anything else. With a leap, his main body and his external body entered the samsara cycle of life and death that looked like a black and white vortex. The moment he entered, the spinning black and white vortex immediately became sluggish, as if it had come to a standstill. This was because Wang Lin was inside and had frozen the samsara cycle. This way, the king of the underworld could not use this opportunity to escape. If the king of the underworld wanted to leave, the only way out was to kill Wang Lin in the samsara cycle and release his suppression of the samsara cycle. Only then would he be free. This would be a unique life and death battle that had never appeared in the great heaven primordial world before. And the result of this life and death battle would also determine who was the master of the underworld Tao, the master of life and death in the world. In the samsara cycle of life and death, their opponents might not only be each other, but also their past selves that existed in the past and the future. Shi Tianhao sat cross-legged on the city wall of Sky City. The great celestial wheel constantly spun above his head. The blue sky celestial array had already been retracted and turned into the spiritual bodies of the 12 heavenly generals. They landed behind Shi Tianhao and stood in Sky City. Shi Tianhao supported his chin with one hand and stared at the black and white vortex that seemed to have come to a standstill. He did not speak for a long time. In the spiritual sea before him, in the void, a large number of light veins were constantly vibrating, shuttling back and forth in the space, emitting the sound of the great Tao. In the distant heaven and earth that seemed to be very close, but also very far away, an independent gray domain existed in the sky there. That was where the gap in the Dead Sea was, forming an independent domain. Lin Feng, the future glazed Buddha Lord, and the people of Taishu Temple were all there. At this moment, it was silent, but it brought an oppressive atmosphere to the entire spiritual sea. However, Shi Tianhao did not care much. Compared to his third senior brother, Wang Lin, he had more confidence in his master, Lin Feng, than he had in himself. A long time passed, but it seemed like only an instant. Suddenly, Shi Tianhao's eyes flashed. He saw that the black and white vortex formed by the samsara cycle of life and death in front of him began to spin again. In addition, in the vortex, there was a strange dark brilliance that rushed out. The splendor scattered as if it was endless, covering the entire void. With the brilliance as the center, the black and white vortex in front of him began to spin strangely. Then it gathered towards the center and was sucked into it. In the spiritual sea, the black and white brilliance of the great Tao, which was connected to it, poured into it. Chapter 1455. More and more spiritual chi, and the light of the great path fell into the samsara of life and death. The whirlpool formed by the samsara of life and death also rolled back towards the center. The light in the center of the whirlpool was still extremely dim, but the strong sense of power contained within it was increasingly profound and exuberant. Where the dim light shrouded, everything in the void suddenly fell into a state of stagnation, as if returning to an eternal land of death. But within it, there seemed to be a faint vitality surging, forming a never-ending samsara of life and death. The concept of power was beyond profound. The concept was similar to that of the king of the underworld's way of life and death, but not completely the same. The concept of power of the Book of Life and Death was also different. It was grander, vaster, and more complete. When Shi Tianhao saw this scene, he suddenly grinned. He opened his palm, and in the center of his palm, the runes that were engraved were shining brightly. Extending his hand, Shi Tianhao aimed the runes on his palm at the black and white whirlpool that was spewing dim light. Then, a ray of light shot out from the runes and fell into the center of the whirlpool. The entire samsara of life and death seemed to shake at this moment. Then, the light in the whirlpool became even thicker. It was drawn by the ray of light that was connected to the runes on Shi Tianhao's palm. and the whole thing rose from the whirlpool. Then, the black and white whirlpool gradually shrank until it was completely enveloped by the dim light. It was as if one was in a cloud and could not see clearly. And in the dim light, suddenly, a huge shadow appeared. As the radiance spread out, it turned out to be a massive city. It didn't seem to be as large as the Sky City, but the power and aura it contained were even more majestic and profound than the Sky City before them. It was an indescribable city. The bricks were neither black nor white, and it looked like it was built from half a mountain peak. The city was like a world of its own. At the foot of the mountain city, a dim yellow river flowed around the mountain city. The water was vast and mighty, but it was silent. It was the Yellow Springs River of Forgetfulness. This long river flowed into the mountain city, and across the city, there was a dark green stone bridge that crossed the long Yellow Springs River. On the city walls, there was a door that also connected the inside and outside of the city. But outside and inside the door were two completely different worlds. Outside the gate on the mountain rocks, a winding and rugged path extended down the mountain. At the center of the city stood a huge black palace. It was grand, solemn, and dignified. The people in the city could not help but want to worship it. Shi Tianhao smiled and jumped off the city wall of Sky Castle. He landed directly in the silent and deathly silent city in front of him. He walked all the way to the Black Palace and pushed the door open. Walking into the hall, Shi Tianhao saw two people standing opposite each other in the center of the hall. One of them was a white-haired young man with a cold expression. It was Wang Lin. The person opposite Wang Lin was the king of the underworld. At this moment, the king of the underworld was sizing Wang Lin up with a strange look in his eyes, but he did not say a word. And in Wang Lin's palm was an ancient scroll. It looked like the Book of Life and Death that had originally belonged to the king of the underworld. The torn Book of Life and Death seemed to be completely undamaged at this moment. It had been restored to its original state. However, with a glance, Shi Tianhao knew that this Book of Life and Death was different from before. It was no longer the creation magic treasure of the past, but the manifestation of its power and aura. Wang Lin turned to look at Shi Tianhao and said with a smile, "I'm back." Shi Tianhao came to his side and lightly punched Wang Lin's shoulder with his fist. He smiled and said, "You're faster than I expected." Hearing his words, the strange look in the king of the underworld's eyes became even more intense. He shook his head and said, "He killed all of his previous and future lives, leaving only one person in this life. He has no ties or entanglements, and he kills everyone he sees. Naturally, he's fast." Shi Tianhao was slightly startled when he heard that. He glanced at Wang Lin and could not help but laugh. "Third senior brother, you're still the same." Wang Lin smiled and shook his head. Then he turned his gaze back to the king of the underworld and said calmly, "It's time for you to end your days." He raised his palm, and the ancient scroll in his hand turned into rays of light that pierced through the roof of the hall and charged into the sky. Then it scattered and turned into specks of light that fell down and covered the entire city. The majestic city shook, and the majestic power and aura became even greater and more powerful. The aura that leaked out interwove in the sky, and it actually vaguely looked like the cycle of life and death. All the worlds in the heavens seemed to be attracted and thrown into it. Only this majestic city stood between life and death, unmoving and unshakable. On a stone wall in the mountain city, two huge words gradually appeared. They seemed to be engraved in time and space, in the world, and in the cycle of reincarnation. Fengdu. In the spirit sea, thousands of rays of light of the great Tao flashed together. Two streams of light, one black and one white, wrapped around Fengdu City like chains. A powerful aura, like that of a world of creation, burst forth from within, showing the extreme of the great Tao of life and death. In the void, the speed of the great heavenly wheel's rotation seemed to slow down, and the light became more mysterious and thick. It shone brightly with Fengdu City, feeling the birth of a new comrade. In Emperor Yan's hall in Fengdu City, as the scroll in Wang Lin's hand disappeared, Fengdu City was officially settled. The body of the king of the underworld began to gradually turn into dust and dissipate. At this moment, his expression became calm. He had used the method of entering reincarnation to break out, but still failed. This white-haired youth in front of him dared to give up a stable future to enter reincarnation, to fight to the death with him. This battle had not been in vain. The king of the underworld looked calmly at Wang Lin. I was once in control of reincarnation, and determine the fate of life and death. I have many regrets, but at this point, there is no point in saying more. It was a pity that even though he had ascended to the position of human emperor, he could not truly rule over the world and rule over the world. It was a pity that the Haotian mirror, once the strongest treasure in the heaven primordial great world, had never fallen into his control, even when he was only one step away from it. It was a pity that he had painstakingly built up from ancient times until recently, but he was still not the main character of this era. It was a pity that he had dominated the world since ancient times. Yan Xinghe, Xia Fangyu, Blood River Taoist, and the others were all top figures of the immortal Tao, but they had all fallen at his hands. But he had ultimately fallen at the hands of a junior. He had been killed in the reincarnation of life and death, and handed over his position as the master of life and death to the person who had killed him. The king of the underworld would not be hypocritical and think that this was a worthy death. To him, only victory, only killing his opponent, and his own survival would be a satisfactory result. As the loser, as someone else's background and stepping stone, no matter what, it was a pity and unwillingness. But since things had already come to this, the king of the underworld would not lose his mind. He was calm at the moment, and only looked at Wang Lin silently. He looked around Fengdu City and said, "The path you walk is the same as mine, and now, you have the hope of walking further than me. I just don't know. How many people will allow you to continue walking like this?" Wang Lin said indifferently. "Is there any meaning in caring about this now?" The king of the underworld sighed and laughed. "It's a pity that I will not be able to see the results." As he laughed, his figure completely disappeared from the world, turning into dust and no longer existing. The king of the underworld Taoist Xiandu, who had left a strong mark in the ancient era, and was also one of the top cultivators among the generations of human emperors, had once again set off huge waves in the Netherworld Sea, and the war between the two realms after experiencing rebirth in the present era. He had almost influenced the course of the war between the two realms, and caused the Haotian mirror to change owners. As a cultivator with the deepest understanding of the reincarnation of life and death in the history of the human cultivation world in the Divine Land, he had been killed in the reincarnation cycle today. His life had finally come to an end, and he had fallen in the Spirit Sea, one of the 7 seas of Tianyuan. Seeing the king of the underworld die completely, Wang Lin and Shi Tianhao did not say anything. Today, they had personally buried an epic legend. And at this moment, both of them felt the world of the Spirit Sea become increasingly turbulent. The two of them looked at each other and left Fengdu City together. Looking into the distance, they saw that the gray independent realm on the horizon was constantly twisting and shaking. Wang Lin and Shi Tianhao's eyes lit up. "It's the crack of the Dead Sea Master's side." At this moment, the fluctuations of the Spirit Sea became chaotic and intense again, and the light of the great Tao kept breaking in the void. The Spirit Sea was in chaos, and from the outside, the Spirit Sea, which looked like a flat surface, was constantly twisting and twitching, like a piece of paper being forcefully rubbed. For a moment, those who were in it had a feeling that they could be expelled by the Spirit Sea at any time, or bear the huge destructive power of the violent Spirit Sea. In the vast 1,000 domains, which were closely connected to the Spirit Sea, they could also clearly feel the huge changes in the Spirit Sea. On the vast land of infinite wilderness, Xian Li's eyes were fixed on the faintly discernible streams of light in the sky. Beside her, Luo Qinggu, Zhou Yunsong, and the other disciples of Xianmen Tianzong who had just arrived also looked up at the sky, paying close attention to the changes. On White Cloud Mountain in the Divine Land, Kuang Heng and the others were also sitting cross-legged, watching the void above their heads. They had already noticed that the escaping Taoist Tiansheng was blocked by the cultivators of Xianmen Tianzong, but at this moment, they were not in the mood to find trouble with Taoist Tiansheng. Instead, they were all focused on the changes in the Spirit Sea. Luo Qingwu's true self, Chu Yang, Tang Jun, and the others also sensed the changes in the heaven and earth. However, they were still focused on the matter at hand. Their attacks were relentless, pressing down on Tianqing Taoist. Taoist Tianqing's expression was extremely solemn as he dealt with the 3 Dharma treasures, the 9 Heaven Sword, Ding of Shenzhou, and the 9 Sun Brilliant Pearl. His heart suddenly tightened, and he turned to look, only to see that the void had suddenly cracked. It did not originate from the turbulent spirit sea, but from somewhere else. Thousands of calamities and tribulations surged out, and a handsome young man appeared. Seeing this young man, Taoist Tianqing sighed softly and his heart sank. Chapter 1456. Endless natural disasters and earthly tribulations gushed out from the crack in the void. It was as if doomsday had come to pass in front of everyone. But looking through the crack in the void, they could see that the world on the other side was chaotic, but everything seemed to have fallen into a state of stillness. It was extremely strange. The nether sea disasters that gushed out of the crack seemed to be orderly, forming a path that extended in front of Tianqing Taoist and the others. It was as if the doomsday disasters that could destroy the world were just ordinary flowing water and clouds. It was a scene that defied common sense. It seemed absurd and contradictory, but it was also shocking and disturbing. The handsome young man in front of everyone was naturally the eldest disciple of Lin Feng, the master of the Celestial Gate, Emperor Yan Xiaoyan. Xiaoyan stepped out of the crack in the nether sea. His eyes fell on Tianqing Taoist and he raised his eyebrows slightly. This is the second time we've fought. It's the first time we've met. Tianqing Taoist looked at Xiaoyan with a rare wry smile on his face. Before, he had once exchanged blows with Xiaoyan through the air, cutting off the clues left behind because of Tang Wenhua. But today he still has to fight with Xiaoyan again. Xiaoyan didn't say much to him. He stretched out his palm. As he moved, raging flames burned around him. His body gradually grew taller, and turned into a 9-zhongtal flame god, standing in the void. A dark red light surged in Xiaoyan's eyes. It was cold and fierce, raging and oppressive. Behind him, thousands of disasters and tribulations rushed out of the crack in the nether sea. Dark evil flame, mysterious sky calamity flame, blood river true water, 9 nether evil wind, infinite evil wind, yellow spring true water, dark destruction chi, demon dream charming stone, fierce eyes ghost fire, floating thunder water. Countless evil forces gathered in front of Xiaoyan's palm. There seemed to be a spot of light in the void, like a spark that hadn't been completely extinguished yet. It flashed and flashed, repeating the process. Thousands of disasters gathered at that point, displaying the creation of the great Tao. It was Xiaoyan's magic, Tao annihilation rebirth. A terrifying power burst out in an instant, striking at Tianqing Taoist. The power was concentrated at one point, not causing any harm to the other existences in the surroundings. All of it was aimed at Tianqing Taoist. Tao annihilation and Tao annihilation seemed endless. Even the mysterious great void light around Tianqing Taoist's body was being shaken off by the baptism. The indescribable and unfathomable mysterious light kept losing its mysteries, becoming shiny and ordinary. Then it completely collapsed and disappeared. Seeing this, the bitter smile on Tianqing Taoist's face deepened. The Netherworld Sea is going to have a new master. He looked up to the sky and let out a long sigh. His body swayed slightly, and the magic power around his body became dimmer and dimmer. However, a light shadow that was almost identical to him appeared again. This light figure exploded and turned into streams of flowing light, sweeping up the black and white auspicious clouds around Tianqing Taoist's body, and spreading out in all directions, wanting to temporarily resist Xiaoyan's spell. At the same time, Tianqing Taoist waved his hand, and a door of light appeared in the void. Without hesitation, he retreated into the door and tried to escape. However, under the impact of Xiaoyan's horrifying magic, the golden light and the black and white clouds were all destroyed. The door of light that led to the unknown also collapsed and closed. Tianqing Taoist was forced out of the door. He used the escape art of emptiness circulation, but he found that the time and space he was in seemed to be completely frozen, then disintegrated and turned into nothingness. Tianqing Taoist took a deep breath and used the boundless transformation art. His body suddenly stepped into an existence between reality and illusion. as if he was no longer in this world. In the boundless illusion realm, the existences in the real world could no longer contact him. However, as Xiaoyan sneered, Tianqing Daoist felt his body being oppressed again. Even in the illusory world, he couldn't avoid Xiaoyan's Dao annihilation rebirth art. Under this art, regardless of reality or illusion, everything was destroyed. Everything ceased to exist, and was crushed into pieces by the powerful force generated by the cycle of life and death of the great Tao. Tianqing Daoist shook his head and retreated from the boundless illusion realm, once again using the great void mystic light. He performed an incantation gesture, and sat cross-legged on the spot. Streams of mysterious light flowed around him, gradually turning into something like the 9 heavens of the great void mystic light, shrouding him within. However, under the effect of Xiaoyan's magic, even if Tianqing Daoist focused on defense, the 9 heavens of the great void mystic light continued to collapse. Luo Qinggu, Chu Yang, and Tang Jun all came to the side of Xiaoyan. Silently, they watched the battle between Xiaoyan and Tianqing Daoist. Tang Jun looked at Tianqing Daoist calmly, without any sadness or joy on his face. Perhaps it was a coincidence, or perhaps he sensed something, but Tianqing Daoist also looked at Tang Jun, and their eyes met in the air. Tianqing Daoist looked at Tang Jun with an emotionless look, just like before. There was no awkwardness, no pleading, and no anger. He didn't try to move Tang Jun to help him out of his predicament. Tang Jun's gaze towards him was also calm, without the slightest ripple. This pair of father and son, who couldn't be considered father and son, looked at each other calmly. Tianqing Daoist retracted his gaze, and focused on dealing with Xiaoyan's attack again. Unfortunately, it was like facing a sandcastle with raging waves beating on the shore. One wave, and it would be smashed into pieces. Chu Yang was also sitting cross-legged. Above his head, a 9-foot-long sword was suspended in the air. Rays of sword light shone brightly, covering the sky and earth. There seemed to be countless illusory figures in the sky, manifesting countless worlds and countless principles. It was as if the heavens had descended and blessed the blade of the sword. As the rays of sword light spread out, each ray of sword light seemed to manifest a mysterious principle of heaven and earth, connecting the 9 heavens and 10 earths, and extending infinitely. The aura of power in the long sword became increasingly sharp and majestic. It hung above Chu Yang's head, like a creation world. This was the ancient heavenly gate inheritance, the creation treasure that Chu Yang had finally mastered, the 9th heaven sword. After the intense battle with Tianqing Daoist and the sharpening of the 9 skies of the Taishu, this divine sword had finally reached the creation realm. Another top-notch divine sword had been added to the great Tianyuan world's swordsmanship treasure. On the side, Ding of Shenzhou and the brilliant pearl of the 9 yang trembled slightly, feeling the rebirth of another of their kind. As the 9th heaven sword vibrated, the sound of the sword whistled up to the 9 heavens and down to the earth, as if it wanted to cut through the blue skies and split open the yellow springs. Across the entire divine land, all the swordsmanship cultivators heard the loud sword hum at this moment. They felt the constant vibration of the great Tao of heaven and earth, and their minds were stirred. Tens of thousands of swords in the world, regardless of whether they were ordinary weapons or Dharma treasures of cultivators, were all unsheathed at this moment and vibrated slightly in the air. It was not the fear of facing the Emperor of Swords like the immortal heaven sword of the past, but the pure feeling of the other party's power, as if one was looking up at the sky and felt a sense of awe. Xian Longsheng and Sword Venerable Tiangang, who were still in the vast Tianhuang continent, felt something at this moment. Although they still could not see, they looked in the direction of Chu Yang, and the 9th heaven soared through the layers of void. Xian Longsheng's heaven-opening sword seemed to be shaken as well, emitting a clear sword hum that vaguely resonated with the 9th heaven sword's hum. The 2 top figures of the Mount Shu sword sect looked at each other, and did not say anything. Their expressions did not change either. The heaven-opening sword vibrated at first, and after the turbulence in the surroundings, it also calmed down. As a swordsmanship creation treasure, it was impossible for the heaven-opening sword not to be moved by the appearance of another of its kind at the same level. But it was just a little bit moved, and it was difficult to have any other reaction. Because now, the supreme sword of the Tianyuan world belonged to someone else. However, everyone in the Mount Shu sword sect inevitably felt a bit complicated. The ancient heavenly gates creation treasure, the ninth heaven sword, and the Grand Jiutian divine sword had always been the target that the Mount Shu sword sect, as the dominator of swordsmanship in the divine land, was most wary of. In terms of swordsmanship, the Mount Shu sword sect valued the Grand Jiutian divine sword and the ninth heaven sword far more than the Taishu temple's heavenly sword of indifference and the Great Void double pole mystic sword technique. Previously, if there was really something that could threaten the Mount Shu sword sect's position as the #1 swordsmanship in the world, then it was most likely the Grand Jiutian divine sword and the ninth heaven sword that died young. However, the heavenly gate was destroyed in the ancient era, and the ninth heaven sword did not even have a real form before it disappeared. This was the beginning of a long era in which the Mount Shu sword sect reigned supreme in the divine land. Now the Grand Jiutian divine sword reappeared in the world, and the legendary ninth heaven sword finally came to Tianyuan, but the situation was no longer the same. The Mount Shu sword sect was no longer the Mount Shu sword sect of the past. The immortal heaven was destroyed, and the world was created. The divine land was no longer the divine land of the past, and the first holy land of swordsmanship in Tianyuan had also changed owners. The world had changed, and the world had changed in just a few decades. Even people like Xian Longxing and Tiangang swordsmen could not help but feel emotional at this moment. Beside Xiao Yan, Luo Qingwu looked calm, and looked at the ninth heaven sword above Chu Yang's head with interest. As a sword cultivator, it was impossible not to pay attention to the birth of a sword creation treasure. However, Luo Qingwu's attention at this moment was still on the world that was undergoing dramatic changes in front of her. Xiaoyan had returned to the divine land, and the Tianqing Taoists could no longer make waves. At this moment, Luo Qingwu was naturally more concerned about the situation in the spiritual sea. That was where the final battle would take place. On the vast land of infinite wasteland, Luo Qingwu's in-spirit doppelganger was also staring at the void in front of her. There, the black and white light beams had gradually disappeared, but the void between heaven and earth was still shaking. Light and shadow floated in front of her, as if the scenes of the spiritual sea and the Dead Sea were alternating. Silently stood between heaven and earth, her expression cold and indifferent. Her eyes were focused and as sharp as a sword, as if it could pierce through the boundaries of heaven and earth and reach the spiritual sea. At this moment, in the spiritual sea, the gray-bounded space between the Dead Sea and the spiritual sea was constantly shaking. In the bounded space, the Haotian mirror hung high in the air, and the mirror light gathered all the heavens and went deep into the crack of the Dead Sea. Lin Feng's original body stood there, looking at the Dead Sea on the other side of the crack. Chapter 1457. Lin Feng looked at the gap of the Dead Sea in the distance, and saw a path of light extending into it. The path of light seemed to have lost the concept of length and direction at this moment. It was difficult to describe its specific location in the Dead Sea, but it gave off a feeling that it was going deeper and deeper. In the quiet Dead Sea world, two figures vaguely appeared. These two figures seemed to be in the center of the Dead Sea, but also seemed to be so huge that it filled the entire Dead Sea world, making it difficult to grasp. As the path of light extended, the position of the two figures gradually became possible to determine and describe. They were in a space of dead silence, and the path of light extended straight until it reached them. It seemed to be connected to where they were, and also connected the Dead Sea world and the outside world. The colossal world, the Dead Sea, and the Spirit Sea were three worlds that were closely connected and overlapped. At this moment, they shook together. Following this series of changes, the two figures in the Dead Sea gradually became clearer. Lin Feng looked over and saw the two figures. One of them had a figure that was difficult to describe with words. It was as if it had the shape of a mustard seed and Mount Meru at the same time. It was difficult to judge with words. This figure looked as small as a speck of dust. It was like an ordinary middle-aged monk dressed in a gray robe, but it was also like a Buddha as huge as the creation of the universe. It filled the entire world, and was so grand that it could no longer be defined by size. This Buddha's figure was solemn, sacred, and grand. There were 5 balls of light above its head, manifesting the pure land of color, the pure land of victory, the pure land of bliss, the pure land of karma, and the pure land of joy. These 5 worlds were located in the 4 corners of the center. It was not inferior to anything and was supreme. It was unimaginably beautiful and indescribable. It was as if everything that one wanted to do could be easily achieved, and everything was perfect. It was as if one had never felt pain or suffered. Those who lived in it were relieved of the pain of reincarnation and reached the pure land. It was endowed with glory and had all the qualities and abilities to achieve enlightenment. Those who lived in it would no longer regress or mutate. Layers of abstruse concepts flowed out from it and illuminated the heavens. It made people want to throw themselves into the 5 pure land, as if they would not perish even if the heavens and earth were to perish. The 5 skandhas of color, action, thought, receptiveness, and consciousness were all purified. The Dharmakaya wisdom, the wisdom of what is done, the wisdom of no distinction, the wisdom of equality, and the omniscient mirror were all proved. The worries of ignorance, jealousy, greed, selfishness, and anger were all turned. Amidst the boundless Buddhist light, it calmed one's mind. It was as if one had achieved the purity of one's nature, achieved everything, and was at ease. One's desires increased, and the Dharma nature remained unchanged. Above each of the 5 pure lands, there were flashes of light and shadows. Above each pure land, there was a figure sitting in each of the 5 balls of fire. They were the figures of the 5 wisdom kings, the immovable wisdom king, the great wisdom king, the Junchali wisdom king, the Trailokaya Vijaya wisdom king, and the Vajrayaksha wisdom king. Lin Feng stared at the Buddha and vaguely had a feeling that he was looking at himself. He could see his true nature and the mysteries of heaven and earth. Just by looking at this Buddha, he felt as if he had gained enlightenment and gained a bit more Buddha nature. Needless to say, Lin Feng naturally recognized the person in front of him. He was the former Ru Huang, Tathagata Taoist, and later the master of Buddhism, the founding master of the Great Thunderclap Monastery, the present Buddha, Gautama Buddha. The other party's gaze also landed on Lin Feng. He was calm and natural, as if he was not the number 1 Buddha enemy, but just one of the many living beings. The 2 of them looked at each other and did not say anything. There was no need for words to communicate. However, what caught Lin Feng's attention was the other figure beside the Buddha. Although the 2 figures became clearer as the path of light arrived, the figure beside the Buddha still had an unfathomable and blurry feeling. Looking at the other party, Lin Feng vaguely felt that it was absurd. It was as if he was facing an independent greater thousand world. It was different from the Divine Land and Tianhuang mainland. It was completely different from the Great Heaven Yuan world as a whole, as if it was a brand new greater thousand world. Ever since Lin Feng came to the Great Heaven Yuan world, this was the first time he felt like he was facing another greater thousand world. Even though this feeling is not clear and is not complete, but Lin Feng can still clearly feel that mysterious feeling. The closest feeling he had was when he saw Wen Qiang's figure in the underworld sea. However, the image of Wen Qiang back then was only a remnant of dharmic power, and was far from being in contact with the real person at this moment. Lin Feng's gaze froze slightly, and the ethereal figure gradually became clear. The person that appeared before him was a man in white. His facial features looked extremely ordinary, but it was difficult to tell his age. The other party's entire body was filled with a vast and mysterious aura. It made one feel as if they were in a completely unfamiliar world that needed to be explored and rethought bit by bit. The original world standards, principles, laws, experience, and so on were gradually no longer suitable for this man in white. If not for the fact that Lin Feng had already reached the void reversion and Tao integration stage, he would not even be able to see the other party's appearance clearly. The man in white seemed to be a little moved when he met Lin Feng's gaze, and he also looked at Lin Feng. Lin Feng met his gaze calmly. The other party's identity was clear. Apart from the founding master of the Taishu Temple, the Taishu Taoist, there was no one else who could have such cultivation and strength. Outside the Dead Sea, under the Haotian mirror, Tao Lord Tai closed his eyes once again. He seemed to have aged a lot, and his aura also dimmed. Even the radiance of the Haotian mirror temporarily dimmed. Tao Lord Tai slowly bowed to the man in white in the Dead Sea. Disciple Tai pays his respects to Patriarch. Lin Feng looked over. In the Dead Sea, he only saw the Taishu Taoist and the Buddha. There was no sign of Yuehua Tian. He nodded slightly in his heart. So that's how it is. The Taishu Taoist and Tao Lord Tai's gazes met. Tao Lord Tai took a deep breath, and a large amount of detailed information was transmitted to his patriarch through his gaze. The world had changed, but the Taishu Taoist's gaze remained calm and rarely fluctuated. There were only a few times when he sighed softly. Extreme Spirit of the Divine Abyss, Yudu of the Heavenly Seas, Crimson Sun Galaxy, Master of the Celestial Gate of Wonders, Heaven Punishing Sword. The Taishu Taoist's voice was soft, and his tone was calm, but it was full of contradictions. It was as if another boundless world was constantly squeezing the boundaries of the heaven primordial world. After a few sighs, the Taishu Taoist's gaze landed on Lin Feng again, but he didn't say anything. Silently, he just looked at Lin Feng. On the other side, the Buddha stood up. Without saying a word, he stepped onto the path of radiance and walked out of the Dead Sea. Seeing him stand up, the Taishu Taoist's expression changed slightly, but he still kept his mouth shut. Lin Feng, on the other hand, noticed that as the Buddha stood up, a wave suddenly appeared in the dead silence and tranquil Dead Sea. However, as the Taishu Taoist sat still, although there were ripples in the Dead Sea and it seemed to be expanding, it couldn't create too big of a wave. In the gray boundary where the Spirit Sea and the Dead Sea intersected, the future star-glazed Buddha Lord, who had been sitting on the top of the sky-reaching pagoda with his eyes closed, opened his eyes. He first looked at the Grand Taoist Lord and said, "The karma between our families will be settled today." He then looked at Lin Feng and said silently, "Master of the Celestial Sect, at least let me see that you have the ability to transcend. If you have the ability to transcend, what harm is there in me waiting for you? If you don't have the ability to transcend and block my path, then we can only fight it out." As he spoke, the Gautama Buddha in the center had already stepped out of the Dead Sea and entered the gray independent boundary where the Spirit Sea and the Dead Sea intersected. He descended into the Spirit Sea and returned to the boundless world. The Gautama Buddha stepped out of the Dead Sea. The feeling that seemed to fill the universe also appeared in the Spirit Sea and expanded outwards. Gradually, even the boundless world could feel it. Tens of thousands of Buddhist believers, regardless of their level of cultivation, whether they were virtuous or foolish, all felt as if there was a flash of light in their hearts. Their thoughts became clearer. It was as if the era of Buddhism had finally arrived again. 3 seats appeared on the sky-towering pagoda. The future glazed Buddha Master still sat in the middle seat, while the Gautama Buddha, who had returned to the boundless world, sat on the left of the future glazed Buddha Master. The sky-towering pagoda was extremely mysterious. Boundless mighty power spread out from the sky-towering pagoda. The seat on the right of the future glazed Buddha Master was still empty. However, there were countless rays of light shining on it. Although there were no real figures, there were infinite possibilities and infinite power concepts. The Gautama Buddha Master did not speak, but the future glazed Buddha Master said in a low voice, "Excellent, excellent." The 48,000 relics on the sky-towering pagoda shone brightly. Within the boundless Buddhist light, the light of a Buddha seemed to appear in each relic. The 48,000 Buddhas sat on the sky-towering pagoda together, illuminating the heavens and manifesting the Eastern glazed light world. This was different from the manifestation of the future glazed Buddha Master's magic power. In the Eastern glazed light world, the Buddhist light shone on every corner of the Spirit Sea. It pierced through the Spirit Sea and shone into the boundless world. At this moment, all the heavens and the myriad worlds were filled with Buddhist chanting, clear and quiet like glass. The 48,000 palms of the future glazed Buddha Master joined together, while the Gautama Buddha Master pushed out a palm towards Lin Feng. When this palm landed, it was as if the entire Eastern glazed light world, the entire boundless world, was collapsing towards Lin Feng. Lin Feng chuckled. "Fellow Taoist, you should wait in peace for a few days." As he spoke, Lin Feng also punched out. The great Tao in the Spirit Sea was swept up, supporting Lin Feng's punch. In the Spirit Sea, the boundaries of the world shook. Light and shadows floated, manifesting the vast starry sky of the universe. At this moment, All the stars in the sky shook and fell, deviating from their original orbits. The entire universe's orbits were scattered, as if doomsday had arrived. Chapter 1458. On one side, he had once ascended to the throne of the human emperor and ruled the divine prefecture. Later, he abdicated the throne and became a Buddha, founding a lineage of Buddhism that had been passed down through the ages and had countless believers. He had gone to the Dead Sea in the ancient era and returned to the boundless world today. On the other side, he had suddenly risen and founded the lineage of Xianmen Tianzong. In just a few decades, he had completed a feat that others could not achieve in thousands of years. He had dominated the world and looked down on the world. The master of Buddhism and the master of Xianmen, two legendary figures, had officially begun a battle in the spirit sea today. At this moment, Gautama Buddha's cultivation was not comparable to the future glazed Buddha Lord. He formed a seal with both hands, the two middle fingers bent like a sword, and the two index fingers reached out to the back of the two middle fingers. This was the last move of the Vairocana palm, the Vajra realm seal. With one punch, the light of Buddha illuminated the world, but the light in front of Lin Feng seemed to dim as he was absorbed into the world created by the combination of Buddhism, Zen, and martial arts. Gautama Buddha's fist was domineering. It controlled the present and dominated the boundless world, but it was fierce and unparalleled. This was reflected in the powerful fist will, which was difficult to resist. The fist will had completely condensed into a substance. Being in the fist will, one seemed to be completely isolated from the outside world, and trapped in the sea of bitterness. Lin Feng's heart moved slightly, but he felt like he had seen his own reality. He felt that this was a good opportunity for him to understand the Tao. But he knew that the Tao here was the Tao of Buddhism. If he was enlightened, he would immediately become a Buddha and escape the sea of bitterness. If he was not enlightened, he would forever sink and never be free. The Buddha said that he was the only one in the heavens and earth, but he was actually referring to the true self. If he could distinguish the true self and see through the false emptiness, all evil would not be confused and he would reach the nirvana realm. Seeing this, Lin Feng smiled. Unfortunately, you have your Tao and I have mine. He also punched back. Suddenly, yin and yang were reversed, and the stars in the sky were shaken. In the void, there seemed to be layers of universes existing. Every layer of the universe fell into turmoil. The stars moved, and wild storms were set off. Such a violent force, concentrated together, confused the boundaries, as if it had transcended reality, and forcibly interfered with the fist intent created by the Buddha's Vajra realm free seal that cut off all troubles. The sea of bitterness formed by the fist intent, at this moment, constantly shook and tumbled, gradually dissipating. A spot of light rose from the boundless sea of bitterness, and then led Lin Feng out of the seal, away from the fist will formed by the Vajra realm freedom seal. Looking at Lin Feng, Buddha Shakyamuni spoke for the first time. His voice was so loud that it seemed to echo out into the Kiliacosm, and yet it also seemed to whisper into the ears of everyone present. To not be obsessed with the outside world is to distinguish one's true self. With this simple sentence, rays of Buddhist light shot out from Lin Feng's body, illuminating his entire body like colored glass. He actually looked like he was about to transform into a Buddha. Lin Feng shook his head indifferently. There are thousands of great Taoists in the world, but they all lead to the same destination. Fellow Taoist, you are mistaken. In an instant, the Buddhist light around him dimmed, as if it had been extinguished, and he returned to his original state. Buddha Shakyamuni looked calm. When he heard this, he just smiled and did not explain. Once again, he pushed his palm toward Lin Feng. This time, the palm print was not any of the 10 moves of the Mahavairocana palm that Lin Feng knew. It was not the boundless seal, the infinite seal, the wisdom fist seal, the Dharma boundary seal, or the last move, the Vajra realm free seal. He just stretched out his palm, erecting it vertically, his palm facing Lin Feng, pushing out with a flat palm. However, such a palm pushing toward Lin Feng put more pressure on Lin Feng than the Vajra realm free seal just now. As the palm fell, heaven and earth seemed to turn into a vacuum, and nothing existed. And it seemed that he himself should not exist. The world disappeared, The sea of bitterness disappeared, and the cause and effect of all things disappeared. Everything seemed to have disappeared. Looking back, he could not see the past. Looking down, he could not see the suffering, and looking up, he could not see the shore. Everything was an illusion, and at this moment, he finally restored his true self. It seemed that everything he was witnessing now was the truth, and the only falsehood in this world was himself. Lin Feng only felt that he seemed to be turning into nothingness. It was not that he had disappeared and ceased to exist, but that he had never existed. Good, good, good. Lin Feng laughed instead. This is the real Buddha's palm. If it wasn't so amazing, how could it be called the first martial arts magic in the history of the divine land? As he laughed, above Lin Feng's head his fruit of the way appeared. It was mysterious and indescribable, as if the beginning and end of all things had returned to one. Although the fruit of the way appeared, Lin Feng did not activate it. Instead, he struck back again. But this time, it was not just the changing heaven and earth magic power that transformed into martial arts fist will. In the empty world, streams of light of the great Tao suddenly appeared together, and then gathered towards Lin Feng. Countless streams of light rolled down, and it was shocking. One after another, light spots appeared on Lin Feng's body, and they were so dense that it was hard to count. These light spots turned into bright talisman characters, and they gathered together, falling into Lin Feng's consciousness. In his consciousness, these characters constantly rearranged and combined, deducing and decomposing the mysteries of the great Tao of heaven and earth. In the end, all the characters combined together, turning into a mysterious and unfathomable immortal chapter. It formed a Tai Chi diagram, and it kept spinning in the void of Lin Feng's consciousness, as if it had exhausted the mysteries of the great Tao of heaven and earth. The fourth chapter of the Heavenly Virtue Scripture, Tai Chi Tao Scripture. As Lin Feng punched out, light spots appeared one after another, intertwining and evolving into a mysterious fist will. There seemed to be many light spots, but in the eyes of the ancestral Buddha, it was instantly clear. 129,600. The number of 1 yuan. The thousands of great Tao of heaven and earth seemed to be supporting Lin Feng's punch. Everywhere the punch passed, many things in the empty world reappeared. The fist will of both sides clashed at this moment, neither giving way to the other. Together, they played out the top martial arts clash of the human cultivators of the divine land. In the process of fighting with the ancestral Buddha, who was at the intermediate and completion stage, and at the immortal realm, the Tai Chi Tao manual in Lin Feng's consciousness became more and more complete. This also caused his punch to become more and more powerful. Under the support of the light of the great Tao, astonishing power flowed out of his body, and he actually vaguely mixed up the boundaries between his physical body, Qi, and primordial spirit. Although the ancestral Buddha could not see the Tai Chi Tao manual in Lin Feng's consciousness, he could feel the changes in Lin Feng's aura. Gautama Buddha did not speak. His other palm also pushed out towards Lin Feng. But this time, it was no longer a mystique of the martial way. In the center of his palm, a swastika symbol spun continuously. As the swastika symbol spun, it brought with it countless images that appeared chaotically. The number was so large that it could not be multiplied. As a result, the many images seemed extremely heavy together. Lin Feng looked over and saw that within the layers of images, there were hundreds of lives, as if the lives of countless people had experienced. From immemorial times to the present, and then to the distant future. Countless people's past, countless people's present, and countless people's future. The great heaven primordial world's past, the great heaven primordial world's present, and the great heaven primordial world's future. Every living being, in the course of their own lives, more or less, would experience all sorts of disturbing things, forming many karmic ties. Lines of karmic ties densely covered the void, flashing with a crystalline luster. There was an uncountable number of them. The karmic ties of all living beings, the past, the present, and the future, were all gathered here at this moment. With the ancestral Buddha's palm, it pressed down towards Lin Feng. That heavy feeling was enough to make anyone feel like they could not bear it. For cultivators below the immortal realm to be entangled with such complicated and immeasurable karmic ties of all living beings, apart from a small minority, most would find it hard to bear. Some might even go insane. Even the strongest powerhouses at the immortal realm, like the ancestral Buddha, would find it hard to sort out the entanglement within. The layers of karmic ties wrapped around Lin Feng's body. Instantly, he felt like he was trapped in the endless mortal world, unable to escape. His mystique, dharmic powers, and spiritual consciousness were slowly being erased. Lin Feng did not move for a moment. Instead, he carefully experienced the feeling. To him, this kind of experience of being entangled in the mortal world was already extremely unfamiliar. At this moment, he felt like he was experiencing the complicated lives of countless lives at the same time. He had walked through endless years, and he did not know where the end was. Perhaps, it was more likely that there would never be an end. If there really was a day when it ended, perhaps he would follow all living beings into an unavoidable eternal slumber, and be destroyed along with this great thousand world. At this moment, all of Lin Feng's mystique and dharmic powers seemed to have dissipated. Only the Taiji diagram in his sea of consciousness that was manifested by the Taiji scripture continued to spin. Silently, the mysterious Tao fruit above his head continued to float. It was as if he had experienced the long lives of billions of lives, but it also seemed like only a short instant. A faint smile suddenly appeared on Lin Feng's face. Without waiting for the ancestral Buddha to make his next move, the aura of his dharmic powers suddenly vibrated and changed again. His spiritual consciousness and dharmic powers that had been worn down by the karmic ties of all living beings instantly soared and returned to their peak. The innumerable karmic ties that were entangling his body like a spider web disappeared at this moment. Slowly, the Tao fruit above Lin Feng's head descended and fused with Lin Feng's body, causing Lin Feng to seem like the origin of thousands of karmic ties, and also like the final node of all karmic ties. At this moment, Lin Feng's body seemed to be plated with a layer of bright and dark light. He understood the principles of all living beings, and also seemed to be able to accommodate all existences. Everything in the world could be found in him, and everything in the world could also be found in him. Even more karmic ties descended, but they all disappeared without a trace on Lin Feng's body. It was as if they had fallen into water, but they did not cause any splash or sound. Not even a ripple bloomed. Seeing this, Gautama Buddha, who was on the sky-reaching pagoda, let out a great sigh. As expected. Next to him, the future glazed Buddha Lord did the same. As expected. As if confirming his guess, Gautama Buddha shook his head and retracted his palm. The countless karmic ties disappeared and returned to his body. Gautama Buddha no longer activated the 3 lives karma curse. He did not stop there. Instead, he flipped his palm and enveloped Lin Feng. Chapter 1459. Gautama Buddha flipped his palm and shrouded Lin Feng. His 5 fingers spread out, as if he was holding up the boundless universe. When his palm fell, it was as if the boundless universe fell on Lin Feng. In the void, thousands of Buddha lights surged and manifested into the boundless pure land of Buddha. All the gods and Buddhas sat in it. In the Buddhist kingdom, Gautama Buddha's figure disappeared. There was only the Buddha light in front of Lin Feng. At this moment, his figure seemed to be separated from the great heaven world, and jumped into another boundless universe. The connection between his soul sense, dharma power, and spiritual energy had been severed from the spirit sea he had been in before, from the boundless universe, and from the great heaven primal world. The boundless pure land of Buddha in front of him was not an ordinary foreign space, a small world created by divine sense and dharma power, or a medium-sized world. It was like a real boundless universe independent of great heaven world. Between heaven and earth, one could even vaguely see the great way light extending in the sky of the spirit sea, as if the infinite great way had condensed into a substance. The spiritual qi in the world was abundant and complete, and the flow of the spiritual qi was completely different from that of the great heaven world. In this pure land, Buddha was the creator and the only ruler. His words were the law, and all wishes came true. Endless Buddhist chanting seemed to ring from the bottom of Lin Feng's heart. It was melodious and mighty, quiet and natural, full of the joy of great liberation and perfection. Lin Feng calmly looked at everything in front of him and smiled. However, this was not the smile of enlightenment, but a leisurely smile. It was as if he had entered the pure land of Buddha for sightseeing. He raised his hand and gently pointed. One light spot after another appeared in the void. 129,600, which was the number of 1 yuan. As Lin Feng pointed with his finger, the light spots suddenly spread out and turned into clouds of light mist. In each cloud of light mist, more small light spots appeared. They were hazy and clustered together. Gautama Buddha's eyes moved slightly. 196 million. Each and every one of the dots of light emitted beams of light that shot out for tens of thousands of meters. 296 billion beams of light filled the air, intersecting with one another as they filled the entire Buddhist kingdom. The pure land of the Buddhist nation that was surging with boundless light actually became dark at this moment. Only streams of light were constantly shuttling between heaven and earth. The grand and solemn Buddhist chanting gradually became lower at this moment. Although it was still quiet, it seemed to have gone far away in an instant, and was difficult to hear. Lin Feng said faintly, "This technique is called the Tai Chi Single Origin Treasure Light. Sorry for making you laugh." The Taiji 1 Yuan treasure light from the Taiji Taoist scripture gradually froze the entire Pure Land at this moment. It wasn't just the myriad things in the world. Even the entire operation and development of this world itself was frozen, unable to be created or destroyed. The great Tao of heaven and earth, the principle that life and death were eternal, was actually being interfered with at this moment. It became absurd and fake, causing the entire world to seem illusory and unreal. The Tao fruit appeared on top of Lin Feng's head again. It suddenly extended from a point to a line, from the indescribable to the indescribable, into a straight line, evolving into the eternal calamity light. After Lin Feng fused with the Tao, the eternal calamity light was no longer the same as before. At this moment, with the support of the Taiji Taoist scripture, it instantly became even more mysterious. The concept of the eternal calamity light and the Taiji 1 Yuan treasure light seemed to complement each other was vividly displayed at this moment. The Pure Land that was previously frozen by the Taiji 1 Yuan treasure light was bathed in the radiance of the eternal calamity light and finally resumed its operation. However, at this moment, the Pure Land that had resumed its operation was no longer in accordance with its original process. Instead, it was rapidly heading towards nirvana. The Buddhist chanting dissipated, the Buddhist light dimmed, and countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas perished together. Their golden bodies withered and turned into dust. The Saraira tree withered, the white lotus was destroyed, and the Buddha's pagoda lost its luster. Its surface weathered and peeled off. The Gautama Buddha's words resounded in the void. As the Buddhist chanting sounded, the entire world immediately glowed with radiance. This Pure Land seemed as if it would never suffer any calamities and would never be destroyed. It protected all those who were immersed in it until eternity. However, when Gautama Buddha tried to dispel the Taiji 1 Yuan treasure light and the eternal calamity light, Lin Feng chuckled and tapped the ground lightly with the tip of his foot. He transformed into a stream of light and left the Pure Land. Lin Feng, who had once again landed in the spiritual sea, smiled at Gautama Buddha. "Using the 5-finger mountain to suppress me? With fellow Taoists' magic power, you might not be able to do it. But this Buddhist kingdom in the palm is truly a new sight in your hands. It's truly breathtaking." Above Gautama Buddha's head, the 5 great Pure Lands dissipated for a moment. However, in the next instant, they had already recovered. Lin Feng's palm stretched out horizontally, turning around and grabbing towards Gautama Buddha. As he opened and closed his fingers, the Taiji 1 Yuan treasure light suddenly spread out. 296 billion streams of light enveloped the void and covered the eastern Vairocana light world with the sky-reaching pagoda as the center. Under the cover of the Taiji 1 Yuan treasure light, the operation of the eastern Vairocana light world also became sluggish. A Tao fruit suddenly appeared in the center of Lin Feng's palm. Together with Lin Feng's palm, it pressed toward the Buddha. Wherever the profound Tao fruit passed, all obstructions vanished. This point was like the birth of all things, but also like the end of all things. Thousands of principles were all concentrated here. Gautama Buddha pushed out his palm. At this moment, his figure seemed to be so huge that it could not be any bigger. It filled the entire great heaven primordial world. However, it also seemed as small as a speck of dust, as if it did not exist in this world. The independent Buddhist Pure Land vaguely appeared in his palm again and faced Lin Feng's Tao fruit. It was like the vast thousand worlds outside of heaven primordial. The thousands of principles of heaven primordial could not be used. As a result, Lin Feng's Tao fruit seemed to be much slower to eliminate it. However, wherever Lin Feng's Tao fruit passed, the Pure Land continued to disintegrate. It returned to that mysterious point, never to be seen again. The situation fell into a stalemate. On Lin Feng's body, a majestic black and white light shone. The sound of the great Tao resonated between heaven and earth, shaking the 9 heavens and 10 earths. Under the support of the creation divine light, although Lin Feng's Tao fruit did not change, the Taiji Yuan treasure light and the black and white intertwined creation divine light fused, and a layer of black and white light was plated over it. 296 billion streams of light vibrated together, pressing down on the eastern Virokana light world from all directions. The condensed world was like real glass. It constantly shattered into pieces in the void and scattered everywhere. Even Lin Feng's palm was pressing down on the sky-towering pagoda bit by bit. Gautama Buddha's expression did not change, and his gaze was calm. Silently, the future star-glazed Buddha master looked at Lin Feng's palm pressing down, and the Tao fruit in Lin Feng's palm. After observing for a moment, the future star-glazed Buddha master's 41,000 arms spread out in unison and formed hand seals. The hand seals landed on the sky-towering pagoda. Instantly, the sky-towering pagoda shone brightly and shot into the sky. Together with Gautama Buddha Master, it supported Lin Feng's palm that was pressing down. On the sky-towering pagoda, the 48,000 sariras transformed into layers of Buddha light. They illuminated the heavens and the earth, and their aura became even more majestic. But what attracted the most attention was on the top of the pagoda, to the right of the future star-glazed Buddha Master. That place was originally empty, with only endless radiance shining. It seemed to contain countless possibilities and the supreme great Tao. But at this moment, the radiance became more and more dazzling, and there seemed to be a faint figure of a Buddha appearing. In this special environment, where the Spirit Sea and the Dead Sea intersected, the heavens and the earth shook together. The tightly stacked Spirit Sea, the Dead Sea, and the boundless universe seemed to be affected at this moment. The radiance of the great Tao in the Spirit Sea was guided to the right of the future star-glazed Buddha Master, and the Dead Sea, which had been silent all this time, rippled slightly at this moment. Silently and seemingly without any color, an indescribable stream of water that was neither black nor white surged out and landed on the light on the right of the future star-glazed Buddha Master. The extremely terrifying stream of water was formed from the condensed power of the Dead Sea. The Buddha figure in the boundless light was still illusory and difficult to see, but the power and aura within it was becoming more and more vast and vigorous. That powerful power was ethereal and unpredictable, like the future with infinite possibilities. It was difficult to grasp, but it also shook people's hearts, causing them to be able to clearly feel its power. On the sky-piercing pagoda, the light shadows of the Buddhas formed by the 48,000 relics all solidified at this moment, turning into golden bodies, as if the real 48,000 Buddhas had descended into the world at the same time. The vigorous and vast power, at this moment, truly shook the boundless universe. Gautama Buddha sat among the Buddhas, and the 5 great pure lands above his head had all disappeared. The magnificent Buddhist world appeared once again, and it was much grander than when he had manifested it purely with his own magical power. The boundless Buddhist world was neither born nor destroyed, did not enter reincarnation, and did not suffer hardships. The boundless and majestic Buddha light, at this moment, could even resist Lin Feng's fruit of the way. Under Lin Feng's fruit of the way, the Buddha light continued to dissipate, but it did not seem to reduce in the slightest. It was still in the void. The Taiji Yuan treasure light stabilized the Pure Land world, and the operation of the Pure Land world seemed to become a little sluggish, but it was still stable. The boundless Buddha light even began to roll back Lin Feng's Taiji Yuan treasure light. Within the Buddha light, there was a sense of tranquility and nirvanic destruction. Wherever it went, The Buddha light dimmed, but other existences also disappeared, extinguished along with the Buddha light. All worries disappeared. It was neither born nor destroyed, neither increased nor decreased, and there was no dirt or hindrance. Under the baptism of the nirvanic Buddha light, the streams of light formed by the Taiji Yuan treasure light, like silk threads, also began to break in the void. Gautama Buddha faced Lin Feng's palm and pushed out his palm. Originally, Lin Feng's palm was pressing down on the Buddha and the sky-piercing pagoda, but at this moment, he suddenly felt that the one resisting was him, and the one looking down was the Buddha. There was no movement at all, and the positions of the two sides had been completely reversed. Chapter 1460. Looking at Buddha's palm, the world in front of Lin Feng suddenly turned upside down. Originally, it was his own palm that was pressing down on Buddha, but now, the Buddha's palm was pressing down on him. The concept of up and down in space-time had lost its original concept and could no longer be measured by common sense. Gautama Buddha, who was in the position of the past, attacked. Future star-glazed Buddha, who was in the position of the future, and the illusory Buddha, who was in the position of the future, supported the towering pagoda and manifested a boundless pure land. Together with Gautama Buddha's palm, it pressed down on Lin Feng. Lin Feng raised his eyebrows slightly, a faint smile on his face. With a thought, a figure appeared beside him. It was Fate Creation Boy. Fate Creation Boy held the Book of Destruction in his hand and gently flipped through it. Streams of destruction chi rushed out from it and turned into dark airflows. They immediately blocked nirvanic Buddha's light. The billowing airflows were like the sky and the sea. They were vast and boundless, causing the entire vast thousand worlds to decay. But these airflows were steadily concentrated at one point. Then, they broke through the barrier of space-time and fell into the Pure Land formed by Buddha's Dharma power. The Pure Land, which seemed to be eternally peaceful and blissful, seemed to be impervious to tribulations, indestructible, and immovable in space-time, started to decay and collapse. Lin Feng pointed his finger, and the Tao fruit in front of him turned into an eternal light of calamity. It surged into the Pure Land along with the Book of Destruction's nirvanic chi. They went on a rampage and pierced through the Buddha land. Suddenly, the Pure Land shook violently. Then a strange scene happened. Everything in that vast world was actually flipped upside down. The thick earth suddenly flipped to the top and the vast sky fell to the bottom. Countless Saha treasured flowers also fell to the ground, revealing an upside-down mountain peak. The mountain peak was extremely majestic. It was like a world of its own. Tens of thousands of Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Arhats, Jedis, and Samanis sat on it. But at this moment, the mountain peak also turned upside down. It lost its power of suppressing the universe. The many Buddhas and Arhats sitting cross-legged on the mountain also overturned and fell down because of the upside-down mountain peak. The scene looked absurd and distorted, as if it was a harbinger of the end of the world. At this moment, the entire Buddhist paradise had lost its tranquil, natural, and grand atmosphere of wisdom, and it seemed as if it had entered the age of Dharma decline, causing chaos to arise and order to collapse. Under the apocalyptic scene, the Pure Land world began to gradually collapse. And at this moment, even the Tongtian pagoda was shaken. The 48,000 Buddha shadows around the pagoda dimmed one by one, and the chanting also became softer. At this moment, the enormous Buddha's pagoda was actually tilting in midair. In the void, it was difficult to determine the direction. Under the blessing of layers of Buddha's light, the Babel Buddha seemed to be unshakable. It stood upright in any space-time. But at this moment, everyone could clearly feel that the Buddha's pagoda had actually deviated from its normal direction and was tilting towards one side. The direct effect of this tilt was that Gautama Buddha and the future glazed Buddha Lord who sat side by side on the top of the Buddha's pagoda were unable to sit still. It was as if they were about to be overturned and fall from the Babel Buddha. No matter what you're thinking, it's fine if you don't make a move. But since you've made a move, then let's have a good talk. Lin Feng smiled and said, if you can't defeat me, then we can get along peacefully. If you can defeat me, then you can make me disappear from this world? That's a good plan, but unfortunately, I'm not someone without a temper. As he spoke, he stretched out his other hand, and the Taiji 1 yuan light enveloped the pagoda once more. This time, the Buddha was unable to dispel it. 296 billion streams of light enveloped the sky-piercing pagoda, and a profound and enormous force surged out, forcefully flipping the sky-piercing pagoda over and crushing the enormous pagoda, causing it to tilt to the side. With this tilt, the pure land that enveloped the surroundings completely collapsed. The Buddha's shadow that was condensed on the top of the Babel Buddha dissipated as well. Gautama Buddha and the future glazed Buddha Lord sighed in unison. And then they left the top of the Babel Buddha pagoda together. If they didn't leave in time, the Babel Buddha that was already flipping over would press down on them. At that time, if Lin Feng continued to exert more force, they would be pressed down on the Babel Buddha pagoda instead. The founder of the Great Thunderclap Temple, one of the top experts in the history of the Divine Land, the master of the Buddhist sect, Gautama Buddha, had been forcefully flipped over from his Babel Buddha pagoda. Taoist Master Taoist frowned as he watched the shocking scene before him. The expressions of Tao Masters Jingyi and Xianwen were extremely solemn. Beside them were the magic treasure of the Supreme Formation Breaking Drum, the Primordial Spirit Drum Immortal, and the magic treasure of the Void Yin Yang Bell, the Primordial Spirit Yin Yang Elder. Right now, the four of them couldn't even take care of themselves. When Lin Feng was fighting with the Buddha, even though they were thrown to the side, they were still locked down by Lin Feng's Yin and Yang return to origin mystical realm. Although Lin Feng didn't pay attention to them, the Dharma realm that he formed was like a cage. Streams of profound magic power slashed down on the Taishu Temple. Soon, it forced the Taishu Temple to disintegrate and reverted to the primordial spirit drum and the void yin-yang bell. The profound magic power was endless, continuously weakening the seriously injured Shoichi Daishin and Taoist Master Xianyi. Even though they were in trouble, when everyone saw the scene of Gautama Buddha and the future star-glazed Buddha being thrown down from the Babel Pagoda by Lin Feng, they still felt shocked. At this moment, the Haotian mirror gradually regained its vitality. Taoist Master Xianyi's expression was still a little dispirited, but he still gently touched the Haotian mirror with his finger. While maintaining the path to the Dead Sea, the Haotian mirror released a beam of mirror light that fell on Lin Feng's Yin and Yang returning wondrous realm. Illuminated by the mirror light, the Yin and Yang returning wondrous realm began to disintegrate. Lin Feng turned around and smiled. "Stay here." As he spoke, he flicked his finger and a light spot flew out. The light spot expanded rapidly in the void and instantly turned into countless talismans. Formation patterns spread out and covered the sky. A huge magic formation was formed. It was the Yin and Yang life and death formation. In the magic formation, a lofty immortal palace was faintly discernible, exuding supreme majesty. It was the Grand Imperial Palace, a magic treasure of creation. The Grand Imperial Palace suppressed the Yin and Yang life and death formation. Endless changes occurred. Rays of light rose and blocked the light of the Haotian mirror. Most of the Haotian mirror's energy was used to maintain the path in the Dead Sea. Now that it was blocked by the Yin and Yang life and death formation and the Grand Imperial Palace, the process of disintegrating the Yin and Yang returning wondrous realm was immediately slowed down. Taoist Master Xianyi sighed again and again. He put his palms together and performed a magic art. Rays of black and white clouds and golden rays fell toward the Yin and Yang life and death formation, and the Yin and Yang returning wondrous realm. Unexpectedly, Lin Feng flicked his finger again, and another huge magic formation appeared. It was the Yin and Yang life and death formation formed by his own magic power, the real formation and the virtual formation combined, and its power was further increased. The complex and mysterious changes continued to unfold, but it still suppressed Shoichi Daishin and the others. On the other side, after Gautama Buddha and future star-glazed Buddha Master were thrown off the towering pagoda, Lin Feng did not stop. He pointed his finger again, and rays of light formed a net between heaven and earth. Then he slapped his palm and closed the pages of the Book of Destruction in the hands of Fate Creation Boy next to him. An unprecedentedly powerful aura of destruction gushed out from the book and engulfed the towering pagoda and Gautama Buddha. Apart from Gautama Buddha, future star-glazed Buddha Master, and the towering pagoda were showing signs of decay at this moment. The clear and transparent Buddha light on the surface of the towering pagoda gradually dimmed. Future star-glazed Buddha Master's many arms and palms shone like stars, but one by one, they were extinguished. Future star-glazed Buddha Master, whose whole body was as clear as glass, seemed to be covered with a layer of dust at this moment. Tranquil and carefree, he was surrounded by all kinds of troubles. Lin Feng stroked the cover of the Book of Destruction with his fingers. He looked at Gautama Buddha and asked with a smile, "My friend, do you want to use the collapse of the Great Way to decide the winner? I'll take it." Gautama Buddha Master did not say a word and looked at Lin Feng. In the Dead Sea, the Taishu Taoist was still sitting upright. His eyes swept across Shoichi Daishin, Tao Master Xian Yi, and the others, who were sealed by the Yin and Yang Restoration magical realm. But he did not stop there. His eyes fell on Gautama Buddha, who was being suppressed by Lin Feng. "My friend, time is running out," the Taishu Taoist said slowly. Gautama Buddha Master turned to look at the Dead Sea and then looked at Lin Feng. He did not speak for a long time. Lin Feng also looked at the Dead Sea and saw that although the Taishu Taoist was sitting upright, the Dead Sea beneath him was fluctuating more and more violently. The soundless waves rose and fell, expanding continuously. Although the Taishu Taoist was sitting on the Dead Sea, he also began to move up and down along with the waves. Lin Feng's eyes narrowed. His beer and sea of consciousness reflected thousands of things, from the sky to the mustard seed. He had once used the water of the Dead Sea as a sacrifice to refine the sky-crushing sword. Now that he was in contact with the water of the Dead Sea, he could vaguely feel that there seemed to be something in the Dead Sea beneath the Taishu Taoist that was slowly awakening. Lin Feng looked up at the Taishu Taoist and asked seriously, "Is there really another level above the immortal realm and below the zenith heaven realm?" In the three tribulations of creation, those who had completely completed the first tribulation were called the last days realm. Those who had completely completed the middle tribulations were called the immortal realm. Even if the Great Way collapsed, they would still be immortal. As for the final tribulation, it was the final tribulation before the world was destroyed and returned to nothingness. There was no distinction between the tribulation stage and the completion stage. The entire world of creation would experience the tribulation together. As long as the great Tianyuan world still existed, naturally no one knew what the process and outcome of passing through this tribulation would be. However, it was the goal of every top expert. Almighty experts who were gradually approaching this realm would have a vague feeling in their hearts and make some deductions. Therefore, under normal circumstances, those who regarded the final tribulation as nothing would be eternal. The world of creation would be destroyed, but they would not perish. Myriad tribulations would not wear them down, and they would be eternally free. The creation of countless eras in the future would not be affected. This realm was called the Zenith Heaven Realm, also known as the Eternal Realm. However, after Lin Feng fused with his own path, his magical powers, and his understanding of the great way of heaven and earth had reached a whole new level, he gradually felt that there seemed to be a gap between the immortal realm and the Zenith Heaven Realm. Chapter 1461. The Grand Heavenly Realm resided in all space-time, eternally free. In the past, Yuhuang Tianhai had named her son the Grand Heavenly Realm. The meaning behind it was self-evident. That was the ultimate goal of every cultivator, be it humans or demons. It was just that up until now, no one had truly ascended to this level. After Lin Feng fused with the Tao, his understanding and perception of the great Tao of heaven and earth had reached an extremely top-notch level. He could sense that there seemed to be another level above the undying realm, and below the Grand Heavenly Realm. This level was as mysterious as it could be. It was not an increase in mystic arts or magic power, but a change in the Tao realm. Stepping into this level did not increase one's mystic arts or magic power, but their understanding of the Tao of creation had improved. At the same time, they had also taken a step closer to the Grand Heavenly Realm. There was a possibility of transcending, or perhaps it was the final preparation before transcending. When Lin Feng continuously deduced the fourth chapter of the Book of Taoism, the Taiji Taoist scripture, when he was about to condense the Tao fruit, he could feel that in terms of the Tao realm, In terms of his understanding and perception of the creation of heaven and earth, he also faintly stepped into that level. And now, as he observed the waves of the Dead Sea, this feeling became even clearer. The Taishu Taoist looked at Lin Feng and slowly said, "I call it the Bridge of Eternity. Stepping on this bridge leads to eternity, but it might be a step, or it might be endless. The true grand heavenly realm is eternal. I wonder who can truly reach it. I've been sitting in the Dead Sea for many years, sitting on this bridge for many years, but only when the final moment arrives will I know if I can take that final step." The Taishu Taoist gave Lin Feng a definite answer. On the other side, Gautama Buddha's gaze was calm, and he did not say anything. On the other side, the Taoist lord beside the Haotian mirror did not show any surprise. In the past, he had also ascended to the undying realm. Although he did not step on the bridge leading to the grand heavenly realm, he could more or less sense its existence. However, only the person involved knew how to take that step. It was difficult to explain and impart. To be able to step onto this bridge meant that he had stepped onto it. Everything would become clear to him. Lin Feng looked at the churning waters of the Dead Sea beneath the Taishu Taoist and nodded slightly. Jia Huang Xuanshang, Ji Huang Xinyuan, and Yu Huang Tianhai have all taken that step? Light flickered in his eyes. After taking this step, there won't be much growth in the power of the divine ability, but there will be many more wondrous things. For example, this world is eternal. Lin Feng's voice reverberated in the void. Not to mention the gray-bounded domain between the Dead Sea and the Spirit Sea. Even in the Spirit Sea outside the bounded domain, Zhu Yi, Wang Lin, Shi Tianhao, Yu Hongyan, and Yang Qing could hear it clearly. The words of this world's eternity caused everyone to tremble slightly. They tried to understand the meaning contained within. This world is eternal. As long as the great thousand worlds exist, I will not die. As long as the great heaven primordial world exists, I will be with it. When human cultivators reached the primordial divinity realm, and the great demons of the demon race formed an indestructible demon soul, their lifespans would naturally be the same as the world. As long as they weren't killed by external forces, their lifespans would never reach the end. However, such an existence, such eternal life, was actually superficial. Not to mention the three calamities of creation. Even in the face of even greater power, it was still weak. For example, the king of the underworld comprehended the cycle of life and death, and could be reborn after death in the cycle of reincarnation. This was already an extremely heaven-defying method. However, there were still many obstacles to this method. At the same time, it could be destroyed by external forces, causing the king of the underworld to be completely killed. He was killed by Yan Xinghe and the incomplete Haotian mirror in the ancient epoch, and was reborn in the modern epoch. However, this time, he was killed by Wang Lin in the cycle of reincarnation, and could no longer be reborn. However, those like the Taishu Taoist who stepped on the bridge of eternity truly lived as long as the world. As long as the world existed, they would not die. Even if they were killed by external enemies of the same level. As long as the great heaven primordial world still existed, they could return. In a sense, those who stepped on the bridge of eternity could only be suppressed, but could not be killed. The only power that could cause them to fall was perhaps the final calamity of creation. Lin Feng looked at the Dead Sea and at the Taishu Taoist. The way to return is this Dead Sea? The Taishu Taoist's voice was low and ethereal. Without entering the Dead Sea, I only vaguely felt it, but I couldn't explain it clearly. It was only after I entered the Dead Sea and stepped on this bridge that everything became clear. Although I can return, I will need to spend a long time in the Dead Sea. The Taishu Taoist said, apart from the absolute dragon of the first, there are two other demons here. I only just learned their names now. One of them needs some time to return, while the other, like the absolute dragon of the first, could have returned long ago. It's just that this old man and fellow Taoist really blocked their way. Come to think of it, it should be the extreme spirit of the divine abyss who fell even earlier. Lin Feng nodded. There are only 3 of them. This means that even great demons in the immortal realm like Bull and Wang Tian could not step on the bridge of eternity. After a pause, Lin Feng looked at the Taishu Taoist and asked, apart from the demons, It seems that no human cultivators can return. The Taishu Taoist shook his head. Fellow Taoist Tai Shirtian did not take that step. As for Qi Yang, Lin Feng said calmly, he actually already had one foot on the bridge back then. If he could return from the Netherworld Sea and accumulate more experience, he would be able to step on the bridge. The Taishu Taoist did not say anything else. However, the waves of the Dead Sea below him became even more turbulent. Lin Feng turned to look at the Gautama Buddha. Fellow Taoist, you should have stepped on the bridge of eternity as well, right? Lin Feng did not mind using the Taishu Taoist's name. After all, the Gautama Buddha might be the first human cultivator to step on the bridge of eternity. The Gautama Buddha smiled faintly. He did not say anything, but it was clear that he agreed. Both he and the Taishu Taoist had taken this step after entering the Dead Sea for many years. However, apart from Jiwa Huang Xuanshang, they had also sensed the presence of Ji Huang Xinyuan, although they did not know who he was. The Gautama Buddha's gaze moved back and forth between the Dead Sea and Lin Feng. Lin Feng stared at the waves of the Dead Sea. After a while, a smile suddenly appeared on his face. Release it. There's no need to continue suppressing it. The Taishu Taoist looked at Lin Feng. The light in his eyes was as deep as the ocean, indescribable and unfathomable. He looked at the Book of Destruction and said slowly, Fellow Taoist, with this treasure, you should be able to fight against a great demon in the middle and completion stages. I am not talented, but I can fight against one with the Haotian mirror. There is also fellow Taoist Buddha. However, even if I can win against the beginning dragon extinction and the divine abyss spirit, I might not be able to stop them from escaping. I heard from my disciple that you have an unparalleled sword that can destroy the heavens and destroy the Tao. In terms of killing power, it is even better than the Haotian mirror. However, the Taishu Taoist said silently, forgive me for being blunt, but if the sword goes out of control, I'm afraid that it is no weaker than an immortal realm great demon. Fellow Taoist, how confident are you? A faint smile appeared at the corner of Lin Feng's mouth. What fellow Taoist wants to know is how much I am on the side of the human race, and how much I am on the side of the demon race, right? In your opinion, not helping either side is the most likely thing I will do. Or if I force Gautama Buddha back into the Dead Sea, and leave you guys to continue suppressing the three demons, that would be the most beneficial to me. The Taishu Taoist said indifferently, I've let fellow Taoists see a joke. When Yudu of the Heavenly Seas returns, I and fellow Taoist Buddha will be fighting 2 against 3, and we won't be able to suppress them. Lin Feng smiled. If the 3 of them really resurrect together, the possibility of them fighting each other first is probably higher than working together. The Taishu Taoist said, if there isn't enough external pressure, then that's indeed the case. Lin Feng tilted his head slightly and looked at the Taishu Taoist. I originally thought that with fellow Taoist realm, having no other emotions and the benevolence of the heavenly Tao, you wouldn't care about anything other than taking the final step of transcendence. Or to put it in another way, in your eyes there is no difference between other people and things. But now, it seems that you are still concerned about the human world in the divine land, about the orthodoxy under your sect, and about the difference between humans and demons? The Taishu Taoist revealed a tranquil smile. It's just a thought. When I wish to be like the heavenly Tao, I will be like the heavenly Tao. When I wish to be like a normal person, I will be like a normal person. As soon as he said this, Lin Feng couldn't help but take a closer look at him. The Taishu Taoist smiled and said, what's more, fellow Taoist is right. If I want to take the final step, the absolute beginning dragon, divine abyss spirit, and heavenly ocean Yudu might not be willing to see me pass my days peacefully. Even if the divine abyss spirit and heavenly ocean Yudu are excluded, when the absolute beginning dragon returns, they will definitely fight with me. After stepping onto the bridge of eternity, once they return from the Dead Sea, there won't be any period of weakness. Their strength will immediately return to their peak, and the time needed to return can actually be considered as the time for recovery. I don't have the ability to completely kill them. If a great battle were to break out, it's still unknown who would die. Although they can't kill me, the time needed to return is too long. If the creation world reaches its end during this period, it's hard to predict what will happen. In that case, I can only continue to suppress them. If I can send them into destruction again, that would naturally be the best. That way, I can have more than 10,000 years of peace. The Taishu Taoist's expression was tranquil, as if he was chatting with Lin Feng about his daily life. Lin Feng's expression was also tranquil. He smiled faintly and said, "Since fellow Taoist has such a plan, then let go of the suppression." As he said this, he clapped his hands lightly, and the void domain immediately began to tremble. This independent gray space gradually became illusory. The radiance of the great Tao in the Spirit Sea pulsed even more rapidly, and the waves in the Dead Sea became even more turbulent. At this moment, the gray domain where the two worlds intersected began to slowly crack. Within the cracked domain, thousands of scenes changed. Chapter 1462. Between heaven and earth, a beam of light that was half black and half white gradually lit up again. It merged with the light of the Haotian mirror, and extended far into the Dead Sea. As the light flashed and expanded, it seemed to turn into a boundary between heaven and earth. Under the effect of Lin Feng's dermic powers, the void realm actually cracked along this boundary. The aura of power in the Spirit Sea and the Dead Sea kept shaking, but they still maintained a fragile balance between them. Through the crack, the scene that appeared in front of everyone was from the vast thousand worlds. At this moment, the vast thousand worlds, the Spirit Sea world, and the Dead Sea world were closely stacked together, and the overlapping point was broken. At this point, the Spirit Sea suddenly opened up and reconnected with the vast thousand worlds. The tide of spirit chi spread between heaven and earth, but it was offset and annihilated by the aura in the Dead Sea. In the vast thousand domains, regardless of whether it was the people of the Divine Land or the vast land of Tianhuang, there was a moment of dazzling light in front of their eyes. It was so bright that they could not see anything clearly. Even their beer sea of consciousness was white. There was nothing but endless light. At this instant, the rumbling of the Grand Tao by their ears seemed to be clamorous, chaotic and deafening, causing everyone to feel waves of dizziness. In the dark sea, Shenlong King looked at the tumbling sea, and his face was as dark as water. Xiao Yan, who was on the vast land of the divine continent, could similarly feel that the netherworld sea was in a state of being turned upside down. The originally violent sea of calamity became even more violent at this moment. In the starry sea, many stars were destroyed at the same time, and rays of starlight kept flashing in the void of the dark universe, flowing endlessly. In the Ying Sea, Li Yuanfang sat on the Yingzhou Spirit Mountain, looking expressionlessly at the white clouds in the Ying Sea. They all scattered and shattered uncontrollably, then merged, and then continued to shatter. Not only the Yingzhou Spirit Mountain that he stretched out, but he could also feel through the array that Lin Feng left behind that Penglai Spirit Mountain and Fangzhong Spirit Mountain were also not calm at this moment, and they were both shaking at the same time. In the empty sea, which was used to being a void battlefield, endless void storms were stirred up, wantonly destroying everything that existed in it. Seeing this scene, the expressions of Tao Master Tai and the others became even more solemn. Is he prepared for this? Feeling the changes of the laws of the world in the realm space, their hearts all sank to the bottom. They instantly realized what the scene in front of them meant. Sure enough, they heard Lin Feng shout, "Xianli, come." On the infinite wasteland land of the Great Thousand World, Xianli, who had been looking up at the void with a cold expression, suddenly had a bright and dazzling gaze. There was a faint smile on her cold face. She suddenly turned into a sword light, emitting a clear sword chime and shooting into the nine sea. Wherever the sword passed, the heaven and the earth and billions of the sword of the world, the sword chime and earth. And Buddha, and Buddha, and Buddha dragon sword and fell. And the sea and earth and Tao sword, and dragon sword in the world. Lin Feng stretched out a hand and opened his palm. The sword light condensed in his palm and turned into a long sword. As the sword light flowed, it was chaotic and extremely ferocious. At this moment, thousands of great Tao lights gathered in the Spirit Sea and became extremely bright. The Spirit Chi tide became unprecedentedly high and surged toward the sky-crushing sword in Lin Feng's hand, trying to push it out. At this moment, the spirit sea went completely berserk and twisted violently. The great Tao of the heavens, which had turned into invisible bands of light, shattered one after another, and a great terror that seemed like the end of the world descended. From the outside, the spirit sea, which seemed to be flat and closely attached to the vast thousand world, was now twisted and wrinkled. It was a shocking sight. But before the violent waves of the spirit sea could really engulf Lin Feng and the sky-crushing sword, the Dead Sea on the other side began to churn even more violently. Large amounts of water from the Dead Sea gushed out of the cracks uncontrollably, almost drowning the path of light that led to the inside of the Dead Sea. A powerful force that could truly destroy all things and return all things to nothingness directly collided with the waves of the spirit sea. The two sides collided violently, neither giving way. As they were swept up by the waves, not to mention Lord Tai and the others, even Gautama Buddha frowned slightly and retreated. As the focus of the two forces, the sky-crushing sword was also flashing rapidly at this moment. Lin Feng chuckled and released the hilt of the sky-crushing sword. Then his palms changed continuously, and streams of divine sense magic power were injected into the sky-crushing sword. As the sky-crushing sword vibrated, black runes appeared around it one after another. The runes circulated and surrounded the sky-crushing sword. After the light of the spirit sea and the water of the Dead Sea collided, they turned into streams of indescribable air currents that continuously revolved around the sky-crushing sword, gradually wrapping it up. In the terrifying waves of heaven and earth, the sky-crushing sword's figure gradually disappeared, leaving only a trace of ferocious sword light at the center of the waves. And as time passed, the sword light began to become brighter and brighter, and the aura it contained also began to become more ferocious and terrifying. Lord Tai took a deep breath. He actually wants to improve it further. He's practically, because the Dead Sea had split open, the sky-crushing sword had a chance to enter the spirit sea. This was the worst-case scenario that Lord Tai and the others had originally planned for. But if they could bring back the Taishu Taoist and the Buddha, then there was still a chance of success. Unfortunately, there were too many unexpected things. The Taishu Taoist and the Buddha only fully understood the meaning of the Bridge of Eternity and Jua Huang Xianshang's condition after entering the Dead Sea, even though they had made their speculations before they entered the Dead Sea. And Lord Tai himself had also sensed the existence of the Bridge of Eternity. Everything was still a blur. Now, while they had brought back the Taishu Taoist and the Buddha, as they left the Dead Sea, Jua Huang Xianshang and Ji Huang Xinyuan would also return. And on the other hand, even without the sky-crushing sword, Lin Feng still had the Book of Destruction with him, so he could not be easily humiliated. Now that the sky-crushing sword had entered the spirit sea, the situation was even more difficult to control. But what made Lord Tai and the others' hearts sink was that Lin Feng was even crazier than they had expected. Not only did he summon the sky-crushing sword into the spirit sea, but he also planned to continue improving it. Such a peerless sword had become extremely powerful after the second seal. It could run amok in the world, as if it could destroy the world. If the third seal was successful, how strong would it be? Most importantly, once it went out of control, who could stop it? In the Dead Sea, the Taishu Taoist's expression changed slightly when he saw this. But before he could say anything, Lin Feng clapped his hands lightly, and rays of rainbow light flashed in the crack in space that led to the Great Thousand Worlds. A white jade immortal mountain surrounded by purple smoke appeared in space. At the top of the immortal mountain, countless rays of light shone around the huge treasure tree that covered the sky. Rays of rainbow light swept up the white jade immortal mountain and arrived above Lin Feng's head. It was the Jade Capital Immortal Mountain and the profound Heaven Treasure Tree. The eyes of the Taishu Taoist and Gautama Buddha flashed at the same time. Their gazes pierced through the layers of space and looked toward the dark sky time cave above the mysterious sky treasure tree on top of the mysterious sky treasure tree. Inside the dark sky time cave, under the small mysterious sky treasure tree, the sloppy old man, who had been playing chess by himself, seemed to feel the gazes of the two people. He finally stopped playing and raised his head. There was no spirit in his turbid, lifeless eyes, but his empty gaze met the Taishu Taoist and Gautama Buddha. The three of them looked at each other in the void for a moment, but it felt like billions of years had passed. At this moment, Lin Feng also raised his head and looked up. His gaze first fell on the cyclic purple qi outside Yujing Mountain, then on Yujing Mountain, and then on the mysterious sky treasure tree. In his sea of consciousness, the Taiji diagram formed by the Dharma and logos of the Taiji scripture kept spinning. Finally, Lin Feng's gaze also fell on the mysterious heaven timeless sky grotto heaven. Looking at the sloppy old man playing chess, looking at the muddled Tianjiwa hiding in the tree, his gaze sweeping across every corner of the mysterious heaven timeless sky grotto heaven. His gaze finally turned back to the sky-crushing sword that he had once again sealed. Thousands of thoughts raced through Lin Feng's mind. Many things that he had been puzzled about gradually had a reasonable explanation. He whistled and patted the top of his head. Streams of light flowed down from Yujing Mountain like silk ribbons and landed on Lin Feng's body. Lin Feng raised his eyes again and looked at the dark sky time cave at the top of the mysterious sky treasure tree. He could vaguely see the existence of light figures in the cave. After staring at those light figures for a while, a faint smile appeared on Lin Feng's face, and his gaze became deep. He shook his head. The branches and leaves of the mysterious sky treasure tree swayed continuously, and rays of light shone. Along with Yujing Mountain and the cyclic purple qi, they gradually disappeared. However, the power that shook the void still made people feel that there was an extremely powerful existence there. The Taishu Taoist and Gautama Buddha watched this scene without saying anything. However, their eyes also shone with the light of enlightenment. Even with their state of mind, they could not keep calm. At this moment, as the great tides of the Dead Sea continued to roll and sweep, setting off terrifying waves that could destroy the heavens and the earth, within the blurry waters of the Dead Sea, two balls of light gradually lit up, becoming more and more dazzling. Sitting on the surface of the Dead Sea, the Taishu Taoist sighed and finally stood up. He took a step out of the Dead Sea and came to the side of the Haotian mirror. The light of the Haotian mirror suddenly became even more mysterious. Under the cover of the light, the treasure mirror disappeared without a trace, but it seemed to be everywhere, existing in all space and time. Lin Feng, the Taishu Taoist, and the Gautama Buddha stood in a triangular formation, and their gazes fell on the Dead Sea. The two increasingly dazzling balls of light in the Dead Sea finally rose up from the blurry Dead Sea. At this moment, the entire vast thousand domains shook again. Two faintly discernible figures appeared from the balls of light. The balls of light were like two doors, each leading to an unknown Baifeng and an unknown path. At this moment, there was a figure on each of the two paths, walking unhurriedly from afar. They were about to pass through the doors and descend into the vast thousand domains. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.